Salvatore, the Savior. Period of creation, 2009 to 2013. Genre, thriller, social critique. Author JGM. Chapter 1, Birth of the Savior. Madness would be our destiny if we all would decide to open our eyes. Salvador Dali. Beyond good and evil lies madness. I encountered madness that day in form of a teeth-bearing monster that was running towards my angel. I hadn't seen coming it. The beast used that moment of inattention to grab my angel by the neck and tear her down. Then the beast discharged its killing lust on my innocent child. She just had become 3 years old and was now being torn apart like a lamb by the wolf. The beast shook her from one side to the other. A bit apart was standing the devil and the witch, those who had released the beast and now did nothing to beware my angel of such cruel fate. They simply let it happen. Even worse, it was their culpability to having let the beast loose. I came running and reached the spot where the drama was taking place. Once there, I hit the beast with my fist on the head, but the beast didn't divert from tearing apart the blood-covered body of my angel. The devil and the witch likewise approached, as if they wanted to admire the work of their beast. They showed not a sign of intention to intervene or hinder the beast to fulfill its hideous work. I took my bunch of keys out of my pocket. In a few seconds I grabbed the bunch with my fist and arranged it the way that one key came to outstand like a spike out of my fist, and then I rammed the key with all my force into the beast's skull. The beast gave a yelp and blood started to spout out of its head. Finally, it released my angel and directed its attention towards me. Its desire for killing seemed to be fed by the forces of hell. How else could it have such forces left to attack me after such a stroke? The creature made a spring at me, but I evaded it, took it by its collar and pulled it up, grabbed then with my other hand its leg and bent it with all my power. The beast got enraged because of its pain. Its pain appeased for a short moment my own suffering. Suddenly the devil dared to raise his voice against me, while the witch was yelling since a while ugly insults. The devil came scandalized towards me. Scandalized. Imagine that, as if he was disappointed that I had neutralized its monster, instead of simply accepting its killing of my angel. I did the only right thing by approaching him with big steps, the furious beast still under my control. And as I stood directly in front of the devil, I threw the beast into his face. The beast, mad with anger, bit him in his throat. His own breed had suddenly turned against him. Again, a fight of live and dead began, whereby this time it was staged between two creatures of hell. The fight was conducted relentless, but in the end both adversaries felt victim to their injuries. They were lying down to the ground covered in blood. The world around us had ceased to exist during those moments of agony. After that events, everything grew quiet. Nobody seemed to have taken notice of the occurred events. Nobody seemed to have seen something. In the history of mankind, this event, as terrible as it was, not even represented a blink. To history, it was only a death victim among many occurred at a historical insignificant moment. Not so for Salvatore. The powerlessness he felt that day gave birth to an idea in his mind. An idea that started slowly to take possession of him. An idea that became more and more an obsession. Days afterwards, Salvatore raised his arm against heaven and swore an oath. From now on he wanted to dedicate his life to a higher purpose. He wanted to free the world of injustices. From now on he would fight injustices whenever he could. And of one thing he was strongly convinced, namely that he could do more in the near future than he ever had considered possible in the past. He just had to want it, want to act, want to feel concerned, even if something did not affect him directly. Empathize with the victims and do something against the daily pathology of normality. Fragment of Salvatore's diary. Pay attention, you faint-hearted, you conformists, you believers of clichés and indifferent folks. Then your time has come. I am here to demolish your misled conception of right and wrong. Here to disturb the comfort you found in your indifference. Here to bring you salvation. I will become a new Messiah, but this new Messiah won't sacrifice himself to redeem you of your sins. This time you will have to make the sacrifice by yourself. Chapter 2. Sweet dreams are made of this. Don't call yourself poor because your dreams did not fulfill. Only those who never have dreamt are the real poor. Marie von Ebner-Eschenbach. The doors of the bus opened, and in front of him he saw a yapping dog. His hate toward dogs had become so tremendous after the incident with his daughter that he jumped out of the bus and landed directly on the yapping Yorkshire Terrier. In an instant, the organs of the animal were squeezed so hardly that a part of the skin burst and some body parts oozed out. The poor animal died instantly. Looking back, it had been an irrational act of Salvatore, triggered by an impulse he hadn't been able to defy at that very moment. The older lady, whom the terrier belonged, was gasping for air. Seconds later, she fainted and hit her head at the cobblestone pavement. With loud howling sirens, she was brought to a hospital by an ambulance shortly thereafter. The Boulevard Press got wind of the happenings and wrote, "Barbarism beyond comparison, ruffian tramples dog to death." The beyond belief had occurred in the early morning hours at a bus line that wasn't known to be highly frequented, what made it difficult to find eyewitnesses. The later questioning of the bus driver ended in his declaration that he believed having seen a man with long hair hasting away. Not even in decent neighborhoods you can be safe from the barbarians of today's society. Commented the newspaper The Daily, the horrible occurrence. Giovanni Gabriele was very sure of himself. He was convinced that everything he had reached in his life, he owed to his highly developed persistence. He was also convinced that everything he owned, he had every right to possess, because he had worked hard for it. His conviction was steady as a rock that everyone can be successful in life. You only have to put enough effort into reaching your goals and have to be ready to perform at a higher level and with more commitment than the basic 9-to-5 work-to-the-rules employee. Gabriele didn't wait that something was given to him. He worked hard for it. But the idea that not all people had given the same start chances in life like him, including the background of a rich family, did never cross his mind. And so he never had realized that a wealthy background was the true source behind his tremendous self-confidence and success. Gabriele was a man with roots and of good provenance, a patriot who believed in his fatherland and identified himself strongly with it. He also felt himself strongly attached to the company, for which he worked since 20 years. That is why he spent many hours at work. He was a man who felt well in telling others the name of the company, for which he worked. It gave him a feeling of superiority, being part of a known and successful company, in which he played an important role. His job required that he took responsibility and that he also made those decisions. Decisions that had to be made by someone like him, someone who had been born to decide. But he was also a man who didn't always play by the book, who didn't always take it very serious with the truth and who didn't always follow protocols. A man who sometimes liked to assist his luck by cheating, to take a shortcut. Like he used to say sometimes to himself, that was his secret key to success. At home he had 2 kids and a devoted wife, the best cook in the world. That is how he liked to introduce her to others. But this noon Gabriele didn't drive home to have a lunch with his family, like it would be expected by a loyal husband, but instead he drove to a motel, like he did regularly since a few months. Like the other times, he was all geared up for it. The coming hours would bring him a welcomed relief. A colleague had given him that idea. Have a little bedtime encounter with a working girl over the noon hours. Works wonders and nobody notices if you are away 2 hours at noon. It looks just like a prolonged lunchtime. Come on, old friend, you should be able to afford it, such a hard-working man like you. Had his colleague told him with a naughty smile. Gabriele drove his car on the parking place and went then over to the grubby employee at the motel's reception, which he despised because of his neglected appearance, checked in under a false name, paid for 2 hours in advance and went then to his regular room. At 12:30, he would have an appointment with La Dura. As usual, he was a little bit earlier there. That's why he started to undress himself and laid then on the bed. He left the door as usually unlocked and so everything was ready for his sparkling adventure. "Hey, who are you? You damn asshole, get out of here!" yelled Gabriele at the man, who suddenly entered the room instead of his wishfully awaited mistress La Dura, and locked it without saying a word. "I am your savior," answered Salvatore to him and turned around. Abruptly Gabriele started to feel uneasy, especially because he still was naked. He sit up fast as lightning and jumped out of the bed. Salvatore, on his turn, approached him with quick steps, grabbed his wrists and turned Gabriel's parrying arms with a flip behind his back. Then he got out of his pocket a pair of handcuffs and cuffed him and took him into a stranglehold. Isn't this what you want? Losing a little bit of control while being at the same time so powerful in your daily life, don't you? Whispered Salvatore into Gabriel's ear. Gabriel choked out a barely understandable, "No, stop you wacko. Let go of me." Slightly bold-faced, our hostage, but we will get to the point where we will like each other. Don't we? What do you want from me? I haven't done you anything, said Gabriel with an insecure voice. Not to me, but to the society. Let go of me, said Gabriel subdued. I will, but everything at its due time. Appeased Salvatore him with an undertone in his voice, which didn't leave a good presentiment of the coming. Chapter 2 Super Trooper. Those who don't have, whether fantasy, nor sense of tact, turn to frankness. Henry de Montherlant. Commissioner Lagina started the investigation in the case. Yorkshire Terrier barbarically trampled to death at the bus station. It was surely the most bizarre case he ever had to handle, and he was not very happy with it. As in his opinion, it was a ridiculous case. It was not a case which had the potential to push his career, nor a case that he could adorn himself with. What should be the useful outcome in getting the killer of that stupid sausage dog? To hell with it. The police had veritably more important things to do than chasing a dog killer, didn't they? At first sight, he found it appropriate to pay a visit to the old lady at the hospital. So he took along with him his laptop with the facial composite software installed on it. Eventually, he could get a usable identikit of the alleged dog killer and catch him quickly and without much effort by issuing a BOLO alert. When he entered the old lady's room, the odor of sanitizer and old people crawled into his nose. It was so revolting that Lagina almost had to puke. 3 old grannies were sitting there, probably her friends from the Sausage Dog Club. And to make the typical hospital scenery complete, she was surrounded by all kind of small presents, knickknacks, and flowers. Ladies, he said cheery, I am Commissioner Lagina, a member of the police corps. Unfortunately, I have to ask you to leave, because I am here to interrogate the owner of the killed dog to get more details about the occurrences. You surely will understand that my time is limited and that I need to be undisturbed to do my work. Therewith, everything had been said, in his opinion. The old ladies stood up, one by one, moaning and grumpy, and it seemed to him as they wanted to provoke him by moving irritatingly slow out of the room. Finally, he got to be alone with the craggy old bat and he could start the interrogation. When La Dura passed by and did not encounter the door open as usually, she was very upset and started to hammer with her fists against the door while shouting, Calvo, you idiot! Open the door! But she didn't get any answer to her yelling, so she went to the reception and asked if he already had checked in. The guy behind the desk affirmed it with a slight ironic smile on his face, which didn't pass unnoticed by her, and to which she felt forced to reply, Don't give me such a bold grinning, you asshole. Well then. La Dura left the motel believing that Gabriel, which she knew under the name Calvo, must have found himself a new mistress and lamented that in the near future she would have to pass on without those estimated earnings she got from the encounters with him. When Gabriel hadn't checked out as usually after 2 hours and it started to get evening, the guy at the reception started to worry. Last but not least because he simply wanted to rent the room again to someone else, as in his business more than in others time was money. So he went to Gabriel's room and knocked politely but also with determination at the door. After not receiving any answer, he opened the door with the passepartout key and was surprised that Mr. Calvo was not in his room. After being firstly surprised, he was upset to realize that Mr. Calvo had left the motel without paying for the additional hours in which the room had been blocked by him. So he immediately reported it to the police. What wasn't very difficult for the receptionist, as he had recorded on his video surveillance the plate of the vehicle in which the customer had arrived. Therefore, it didn't matter if the customer had used a false name, with one exception. There was nothing to do if the car had been stolen, what unfortunately had been more than once the case with the clientele he had. Mr. Pergo, the receptionist, reproached to himself that he hadn't noticed the departure of the bill-dodging customer, especially as he constantly was surveying the driveway to the motel with a camera. But today's football game on TV probably had distracted him overly. Gabriel, on his side, had an uncomfortable ride behind him as Salvatore had sealed up his mouth with duct tape, then packed him into a bathrobe and thrown him into the trunk of his car. Now the trunk was opened and he was dragged out rudely. They were situated somewhere at the harbor, standing in front of a container. With one hand, Salvatore pulled open the crunching metal doors of the container, while with the other hand he was holding Gabriel strongly in his grasp. They were looking at an empty 40 square meters room. He bumped Gabriel into the room and then he tore the duct tape from his mouth. Gabriel acted instinctively, following his life motto, "Attack is the best defense," and started directly with a salve of words. "What has gotten into your mind? What is this all about?" Salvatore didn't answer him right away. Then after a moment he said, "Are you getting insecure? Surely not. But what is this all about? You will end up in prison for that, what you are doing here. Well, let me say you should be insecure of what is coming and you should go to prison. But wait a moment. Right now you are already in prison, aren't you? What? You are crazy, you. Were you waiting for your mistress, as usually? Does your wife know about her? And the children too? And all the others, in front of which you act as an honorable businessman?" Gabriel hesitated for a moment and answered then, "I am an honorable businessman and did not commit any crime, on the contrary to you. What you are doing here is called kidnapping and coercion." "Yes, sir. Even facing an imminent threat, you hold up your facade. That is just pathetic and embarrassing. Just pitiful. You don't deserve any respect. Others in your situation would have shown by now much more appropriate reactions like fear, humbleness, or regret." "You are completely crazy," replied Gabriel, very upset. Maybe not. What do you want from me?" "I want to liberate society from you, and you from yourself." Gabriel hesitated and asked then timidly, You want to kill me?" The upcoming fear and concern were unfamiliar feelings to him. He disliked them. "Well, no, that is your responsibility. De facto, you are already dead since a long time ago. Since the day you decided to bury your humanity. As said, I come to free the society from you and you from yourself." Gabriel tried a new tactic. "I have money. A lot of money. Is it that what you want?" "No," answered Salvatore, him loud and unmistakable. "Let me call my wife. She can bring you the money or deposit it anywhere you want without involving the police." "Please," begged Gabriel. His voice got more and more whiny. "Money. That is your main interest in life, isn't it? Do you think your wife will help you out if she finds out what you were doing regularly back there at the motel?" Gabriel wanted to say something in his defense, but Salvatore signalized him to keep quiet by waving with his hand. "Don't make any efforts to excuse your behavior. It is too late for that." "Too late?" "Yes, too late. During the past years you have taken what you wanted. You have used people like they were goods. Do you think that you will get now a chance to talk you out of this?" Gabriel pulled together all his courage and argued. "But almost everyone does it. Everyone goes once to a hooker to get himself some sexual relief. This is not what I mean. You didn't listen to me. People are not goods. You can't treat them, use them, and decide over them like if they were goods." "Hugh. And most of all," interrupted Salvatore him with a remarkably louder getting voice, "no one should force others into the situation having to offer themselves like if they were goods or having or let treat themselves like goods. This is the worst of your misdoings." Gabriel recognized that it was useless to continue arguing. He kept the argument. "But this is normal. Every businessman does it." To himself, he had come to the conviction that any further arguing would rather harm him than be useful. "Did you ever suffer hunger?" yelled Salvatore at him. Gabriel wanted to reply a shy no, but he didn't come so far. "No, you didn't," yelled Salvatore at his face and started to lose his countenance. "No, you are convinced that everyone can get anything, don't you? He just has to want it hard enough or boldly claim it for himself, like you used to do, don't you?" "Well, I would say yes," stumbled Gabriel. Well, you believe that everyone gets what he deserves. You believe in the American dream career, from dishwasher to manager, don't you? Did it never occur to you that not everyone can do the job at the company with the salary he wishes? That many people probably never will fulfill any of those desires, no matter how hard they try? Did it never occur to you that every day millions of people, in order to survive, have to bear a lot of unpleasant things? The most unpleasant probably is the fact of having to sell their dignity as humans, having to renounce their self-determination to people like you. Yelled Salvatore further. It's something you never have experienced, Mr. Gabriel, isn't it? You are the one who usually makes the decisions, but once in a while, you are longing for someone who decides what you have to do. That's the moment when you go and visit your mistress. It's her job to make your short-time expedition into slavery pleasant. For you, this is just a further game, but for others, it's the daily bread. Finished Salvatore his tirade. But that's how life works. Not everyone can be the boss. That's not my culpability. Gabriel had pulled together all his courage together and reacted now harshly against Salvatore's accusations. Your replies are all but a bunch of empty phrases, Mr. Clichés. I heard them 1,000 times before and 1,000 times before they have upset me. Somehow you are right, but still it is your fault, and I will tell you why. What? Come on, leave me alone. You are crazy, you wacko? Gabriel would have preferred to call him asshole, but he managed to restrain himself. Then right now he had decided to change his tactic and show himself more self-secure. Maybe like that he could still make a turnaround and save the situation. You let the injustice happen by doing nothing there where you could have done something, and you also facilitate it by dismissing employees, like you did recently. Aha! Well, now I understand. You are one of the dismissed employees, which is longing for revenge. Well then, pay close attention, my friend. We have lists of all former employees. You won't get away so easily. Did you hear me? They will find you, and then you are finished. Salvatore negated his assumptions by shaking his head. Well then, you are one of these activists, one of those who are always protesting against one thing or another. Salvatore negated his assumption again, and a thin smile came over his lips. So, what am I supposed to do, in your opinion, in order not to damage the dignity of the employees? What? Salvatore answered promptly. Well, first of all, you could start to take your employees seriously instead of lying to them and telling them that the online employee survey is anonymous, while it isn't, and afterwards you use the survey results to identify those who weren't happy with your management methods to dismiss them. And while saying that, he held up some papers which he had taken out of his jacket pocket. Gabriel swallowed empty. Then he said, "Where did you get that? Are you from the labor union? That definitively goes too far. Let me immediately go. That's your last chance." Salvatore grinned again. Then he said, "I will leave you to yourself, so that you can think about your doing and the consequences it has for others. In the corner you have a cooling box with some food." And while saying that, he left Gabriel back in the container and closed the heavy metal doors behind himself. Gabriel started begging, "Please, don't leave me here alone." On top of it, he had left him cuffed. So he kicked with his naked feet against the steel wand of the container, which hurt him. Then he started to call vociferously for help. But after an hour, he couldn't yell anymore. After another hour, he had also enough of kicking with his bare feet against the container wall. Last but not least, because it hurt him tremendously, he started to feel hungry and thirsty, so he went to the cooling box in the corner. His hands were still cuffed behind his back. With some major effort, he managed to bring them to his front. Then he grabbed the handle of the box, but as he wanted to open it, he noticed that it was blocked. He started to shake it, but then realized reluctant that the box was locked. Another trickery of that asshole, thought he, and yelled, "You bastard!" After a further hour, in which he had thrown the box again and again versus the wall of the container, which was quite difficult with his hands in cuffs, the hinge of the box cover finally broke and the box opened. Relieved, he said to himself, "Finally!" Gabriel approached the box and threw a look inside, but to his surprise there were a lot of banknotes inside. He grabbed the box angry and turned it upside down, but instead of the expected food, there were only more of these stupid African banknotes oozing out of the box. Abruptly, he understood the truth message. which Salvatore had left him, and yelled with a trembling voice, "You damn pig!" For the first time in his life he understood that there were more important things in life than money, for example something so simple like food. A week ago Salvatore and Gabrielle had met already, even if not both of them had taken notice from each other in the same way. Gabrielle usually gave little attention to others. Salvatore, on the other side, was at Gabrielle's office in the role of a photographer in company of a journalist. The reason for their visit was an interview with Gabrielle regarding the planned mass dismissing by company. It simply was not reasonable to the public why an economical healthy company still had to dismiss people, by arguing that it was a necessity because of profitability reasons. When Salvatore and his journalist colleague took place in the armchairs in front of Gabrielle's big mahogany desk, Salvatore accidentally saw some interesting-looking documents in the trash standing beside the desk. He used a small moment of inattention of the other present to act like he was looking for another camera objective in his bag, while instead he pulled quickly the documents out of the trash and let them disappear in his bag. The documents had caught his attention because he had seen on them the words "employee survey" and the note "dismissal" beside some names. Both words did not fit together at first sight. After he studied the documents at home, he came to the conclusion that Gabrielle had pretended towards the employees that the survey would be anonymous. Instead, he personalized the results and took them as aid to choose the employees, which he wanted to dismiss. Chapter 4: Overture of a Trial. If you succeed to judge yourself, then you are truly wise. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. La Guina was able to book a small success on his account, because he returned with an acceptable facial identikit to the police station. Therewith he fed a database of convicted criminals, but to his deception he found nobody fitting to the picture. Probably he would have to deal longer with this absurd case than he wanted and had expected. If they would have told him at the police academy that he would have to go after dog killers, even if they were as raw as the one he was after, he would have died of laughter, and now he was sitting at his desk and doing exactly that, chasing a dog killer. What a mess! But right now he wanted to gain some distance from this ridiculous case and deal with something different. Luckily, all commissioners had to treat more than one case at the time, so he thought, let's see what came in today. He looked at the database of the new cases with the intention to pick out something fitting his interest. And to his surprise, he quickly found something. An announcement of a missing person. Fresh from this morning. The well-known businessman Giovanni Gabriele was being reported missing by his sorrowful wife. A case for La Guina. Therewith he could make a name for himself, so he inscribed himself in order to get the case assigned. Unfortunately, the final decision was depending on his superior, which mostly did not make the right decisions in La Guina's opinion. It seemed to him that his boss did not have at all La Guina's career in mind when he made his decisions. Meanwhile, Salvatore entered the city's history-charged courthouse, on whose front gate the words, "Si vis pacem, coli justitiam." If you want peace, take care to justice, were displayed. How veritable, thought he. Today he would meet again the witch. The coming fight he had to carry out with her in court. The law demanded it that way. Under other circumstances he would have solved their differences a long time ago in a completely different matter, but this time he wanted to do it the official way. Last but not least, because at the moment he could not afford to attract any attention on him and his crusade against the injustices of this world. He feared that he would be dragged into criminal investigations if he killed the witch, even if he would have loved to do so, as revenge for the death of his daughter. Salvatore looked at the big board in the entering hall. He was looking for the courtroom for civil law trials, in which the trial would take place. After he had spotted the room on the board, he started to step up the stairs. As usual, he always took 2 steps at once. That was a custom that he had since way back. He even could not remember when he had started with it. But when he went on a walk with his daughter Alice, he always acted regardful towards her. Then he let go of his custom and took cautious her hand. Step by step they climbed the steps, while Salvatore said encouraging to her, "And another one, and another one." From the beginning on, destiny was not in Alice's favor. Her mother, Maya, died shortly after giving birth to her. The doctors had messed around, causing a blood poisoning that took her life. And now something that shouldn't happen to any father had happened. He had to bury his child. His facial expression reflected his anger. They had taken from him his daughter. Such an act demanded for a punishment. He now had arrived at the doors to the courtroom, and an ill-tempered door guard in police uniform blocked the entry. "And you are?" asked he snootily. "Salvatore Liberatori," answered Salvatore in the same distant tone. Then he took out his court citation letter and held it right below his nose. The doorman took a step back. He was obviously irritated, and then quickly glimpsed at the citation, to finally overcome himself by saying, "Well, empty your pockets and put everything on that table. Then stand still and spread your legs so that I can search you." Salvatore did as demanded and submitted himself to the procedure. Shortly after, the doorman said, "Well, you are free to enter the courtroom," and slapped him on the shoulder. An aged law officer received him inside, and Salvatore showed him wordless his citation, whereupon the officer guided him to his seat. After Salvatore had sat down, the man said to him, "I wish you good luck, may justice be served." Obviously, the old man was informed about the content of the coming hearing. Salvatore looked him into the eyes and saw a warm and friendly expression. Then he replied friendly to him, "Thank you." After a while, the judge entered the court in his traditional black robe. The witch was still not present. After the judge had sat down, suddenly a nagging sound was hearable at the court door. There she was. That was her kind of announcing herself. She had barely entered the courtroom, as the judge threw, with an iron tone, at her the words, "You are late. Sit down." She replied to his words with a look full of despite, like she would be Medusa, the old mythic figure from the Greek sagas, having the ability to turn him to stone with one look of her deadly eyes. "Who are you?" asked the judge in a harsh tone. "My name is Serafina Kantaris. Court reporter, please write down that the counterparty arrived too late to the trial." Meanwhile, the witch had sat down next to her lawyer, a tanned, slippery guy in his mid-40s in a dark blue pinstripe suit. She was wearing a black skirt with a bright yellow blouse that gave her the look of a wasp. Around her neck she had a boa adorned with artificial feathers, which gave her moreover a trashy touch. She had barely sat down as they started whispering, and she looked repeatedly rancorous towards Salvatore's direction with her tainted green-gray eyes. Finally, the judge declared the trial for opened with the following words. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Judge Erato. This is a civil case. On my front right side we have Mr. Salvatore Liberatori. He wishes to advocate himself. And on the left side is sitting Mrs. Serafina Kantaris. She is being defended by her lawyer, Mr. Torzilage. Back in the audience banks were sitting some journalists. The case had attracted their attention because of the unusual happenings during the dog attack. Some of the usual boulevard journalists expected to have something at their hands to catch the reader's attention for the next weeks in a series of articles. Let us start with the description of the happenings. Therefore, I first want to consult the police report, which has been written by the here present policemen. He started to read aloud the police report, and in his head Salvatore relived the whole terrible incident. Back then, the police's attention, regarding the horrible occurrence, had been drawn by a traffic helicopter, which at that said day was overflying the area and had seen the injured parties lying on the soil. Now the horrible images started to come up again in front of Salvatore's inner eye. But also an awful pitch-dark anger mixed itself into the pictures, when he heard all the lies, which had found their way into the police report. He knew well that this wasn't the fault of the policeman. Absolutely not. As there had been no eyewitnesses, and the traffic helicopter only took notice of the events at the moment when the two death bodies already were lying on the floor, the police report was nothing else than a mixture of the testimonies of the two involved present parties, and therewith it included all the lies Kantaris had told them. At least it was clear to the officials that it was a tragic occurrence for all involved parties. But there were still a lot of questions open. The case was unusual. For example, one open question was, how did it happen that the dog also had attacked the owner? That was rather odd and had to be clarified. Salvatore Liberatori had filed a lawsuit against Kantaris for murder by negligence, and demanded that she was condemned to a damages payment and a jail sentence. While Serafina Kantaris on her part had filed a lawsuit against Salvatore for brutal killing of her dog and provoking the death of her husband. Her allegations were somehow odd in the eyes of the judge, as she had indeed given to protocol, that Mr. Liberatori had grabbed and strangled her dog and then incited him against her husband, which then died because of the dog's attack. It was obviously not credible, as the dog was a bull terrier, a dog race known for its reputation as combat dog. As the judge had ended reading aloud the police report, he said, "I now want to ask one of the two officers into the witness stand in order to question him, so that he can tell us his point of view of the occurrences. He should describe to us in which condition he encountered the two involved parties at the scenery. Mr. Balestra, please step into the witness stand." The young officer, he had to be in his late 20s, entered the witness stand dressed in his uniform and spoke for 10 minutes, while he mostly repeated that what already was written in the police report. After he had ended, the judge said, "Mr. Liberatori, you now have the possibility to question the witness." Salvatore looked at the judge and said, "Dear Judge, I want to renounce my interrogatory of the officer, as he has not been an eyewitness of the occurrences. I know what happened, and I know that I lost my precious beloved daughter. The culpable is that which over there, which let loose a wild animal." And while saying that, he pointed with his finger towards Cantaris, which on her side reacted with an indifferent "pa." The judge waited a brief moment and said then, "Well, as you wish, but I have to ask you both to abstain of such mutual hostilities. Please remain factual. You are here at a courthouse. Mr. Torzalidge, the witness is yours," said he then with a sweeping gesture towards Cantaris's lawyer. Torzalidge rippled his lips, what gave his slippery expression an additional roguish touch. Then he stood up without haste and went with gentle steps to the officer, which still was sitting in the witness stand. "Officer Balestra, when you arrived at the scenery, what did you see there? How did you personally perceive the scenery?" "Well, a man and a child were lying covered in blood on the pavement." He hesitated a moment and added then, "And the dog also." For an instant he remembered the atrocious sight, which was the reason for his hesitation. "First thing I did was speaking with the screeching woman, Mrs. Cantaris, which was pretty upset. She said constantly, 'Take him in custody, this sicko over there. Yes, this sicko. He killed my dog and my husband. He killed them both.'" "MHM, please continue," encouraged Torzalidge him. "Well, we had to prevent Mrs. Cantaris from attacking Mr. Liberatori, as she was really upset. Cantaris stood up instantly, as if she had been stung by a wasp, and wanted to start nagging. Her lawyer was barely able to signalize her with his hand that she better kept quiet. She snorted briefly, clenched her teeth, and then sat down. "Well, don't you share the opinion that after such a loss, after all she lost her beloved dog and her husband in the same day, isn't it normal to be a little bit upset?" asked Torzalidge Mr. Balestra suggestively. "Well, yes," answered Mr. Balestra slightly unsure. "Well then, please go on." "I asked Mrs. Cantaris what had happened, and she told us that they were taking a walk, that then the child came running all alone, while the father was standing far away. Then the girl started to throw stones at the dog. She told her to stop, but the girl just didn't listen to her. Then she called for the father, but he didn't react. Suddenly the dog broke away and attacked the girl. Thereupon the father came by and attacked in a bestial manner with a bunch of keys first the dog, and then he even incited the dog to attack her husband." "Lies, nothing but lies," screamed Salvatore from his corner. He had stood up and was threatening the lawyer with his fist. The judge called him immediately to order. "Mr. Liberatori, I have to ask you to sit down. Please. You had your opportunity to interrogate Mr. Balestra." Salvatore sat down again. "Well then, Mr. Balestra, let's go on and hope that we don't get interrupted again," said Torzalidge mockingly. "Okay." Then my colleague approached the man, who was crouching beside the girl, which was lying on the soil, and he was holding his palms in front of his face. Mr. Liberatori was at the first moment not responsive. Moments later, the ambulances arrived to bring the dead bodies to the next hospital. Mr. Liberatori wanted to ride along with his daughter in the ambulance. Normally, we don't allow it. If there are casualties, the protocol dictates that we have to preliminary interrogate the involved parties on site. Later at the hospital, we were able to interrogate him to our surprise. He said something completely different regarding the occurrences, namely, "Well, we all heard that already. cut him Torzalidge short. "Mr. Torzalidge, please let the witness finish with his statement," reprimanded the judge him in a sharp tone, and said then much friendlier, "Please continue, Mr. Balestra." "Well," Mr. Liberatori said, "that he was taking a walk with his daughter when she suddenly got attacked by the roaming dog. He confirmed that he was standing a bit behind her. When he saw what was happening, he immediately ran towards his daughter to help her. Then he pulled the dog of her and struggled with him, whereupon he took his bunch of keys and stroked with it the dog. Then the owner approached them. He got between them and the dog attacked him and wounded him deadly." "Well then, Mr. Balestra, thank you for your statement. You now can leave the witness stand if Mr. Torzalidge does not have any further questions." Torzalidge negated by slightly shaking his head. "At the moment we have a word against word situation. Please consider that independently of the claims of both parties, this process is a civil process, because the occurrence has been classified by the police as accident with lethal consequences, and not as crime, therefore there was not filed a demand for prosecution. The purpose of this civil process is to verify if there has been a grave negligence in behavior from one or both parties and therefore damage payments are due," instructed the judge the audience. "Therefore now I will interrogate both parties myself, and afterwards each party has the occasion to interrogate the other party in the witness stand. Remember that each party will have to testify under oath. This point is very important. Do not forget that when you make your testimony. The questioning of Salvatore and Kantaris through the judge did not result in any new findings. Both of them practically repeated what they had given to protocol already. The only annoying difference was that Kantaris called her deceased dog constantly, "My dear Cerbero." After that, it was her lawyer's turn. He tried to fortify Kantaris' lies with neat placed suggestive questions, but Salvatore didn't step in any of his traps. Instead, he stoically negated all untrue declarations of Kantaris and stuck to his version. Now it was Salvatore's turn to question Kantaris. She sat into the witness stand and commenced to fiddle in her handbag. At the same time, she turned her head demonstratively uninterested to the left, watching slightly towards the ceiling, something that gave her a tremendously arrogant expression. Salvatore stood up and went with fast steps towards her. He would have loved to stab her right now in the chest. Unfortunately, he didn't carry a knife with him, but it also would make the whole situation worse, as Salvatore also had a son from his first marriage. His son now was 10 years old, and he felt obligated to him, even if the contact between them wasn't very vivid. And most important, he didn't want his son seeing him being proclaimed as murder in the news. Straightforwardly, he asked Kantaris, "Was the dog leashed when he attacked my daughter like a beast? Yes or a no?" Kantaris still gave herself indifferent. She continued to watch to her left towards an imaginary point. "Answer me, you witch!" roared Salvatore. "Mr. Liberatori, I have to urge you, please behave and control your temper. I tell you this for the last time." Through the judge between them, Kantaris' lawyer Torzalidge showed a suppressed, malicious grinning on his face. "Mrs. Kantaris, please answer the question," instructed the judge her. Immediately her lawyer stood up and intervened, saying, "Dear Judge, Mrs. Kantaris claims her right to remain silent." "Well then," said the judge, disappointed, "you have the right to remain silent, but I remind the jury to take note of this, as it is not very helpful and constructive for the truth-finding process and the progress of this trial." Salvatore returned to his place. He didn't say any further words. "Well, then I have to conclude that you don't have any further questions for Mrs. Kantaris, Mr. Liberatori?" Salvatore nodded conformingly. "It shall be noted that Mr. Kantaris has made use of her right to remain silent. That is not very helpful, especially as there are still a lot of unanswered questions." The judge took the police file and started to study it. Then he said, "Well, on the police pictures there is visible that the dog had a collar, but it is not visible if he had a leash on, as he is lying on the side. It is quite possible that he is lying on the leash. From the perspective on the pictures is nothing to see. This is indeed the crucial point in this matter. Then if the dog had no leash, Mrs. Kantaris, then it doesn't look very well for you. You know that in our country there is an obligation to walk a dog on a leash on public places." Reminded he her. "Mr. Balestra, I ask you, did the dog have a leash on?" Actually, somebody should have noted that in the police file, said the judge in an angry tone. In embarrassment, Balestra cleared his throat. Then he said, I am truly sorry, but in this whole excitement this really slipped through our fingers. We have only the police pictures and the statements of the involved parties to rely on. You should have seen the situation. When we arrived there was such a commotion, and we also were very shattered by the events. It's all right, interrupted him the judge. I give you the order to undertake further investigations. Question the members of the rescue helicopter, your colleagues and all other people who might have seen if the dog was wearing a leash when he got removed of the scene. Mr. Balestra nodded ruefully. What concerns the statement of Mrs. Kantaris regarding the girl throwing stones at the dog, we cannot find out something useful afterwards. Here we are depending on possible witnesses, which might have seen the occurrences. Make also a public witness appeal, Mr. Balestra. As these investigations have to be done, I want to defer the process and fix a second encounter. The parties will be notified in time about the exact date for the second encounter. The trial ended as Salvatore had feared it. Inconclusive. It seemed that the only way to change something was to be better prepared for the next trial. He had to act more skilled by working on his questioning technique. He had also to prepare his questions and answers better by thinking about which strategies Torzalage possibly could use to get a non-guilty verdict for Kantaris. Fragment out of Salvatore's diary. I hate relativists. Relativists have the tendency to declare everything as a matter of individual taste or opinion. Everything is relative in their eyes. Everything has another value depending on the point of view. With that attitude, relativists have the purpose of not having to look for arguments, nor to defend their position. They simply don't want themselves to be questioned. That's why they declare everything to a question of personal taste, or preference and opinion. Everyone is different, they proclaim, and everyone has his own opinion. Tastes are different. And similar platitudes they keep repeating over and over, but in fact not everyone is so different as it sounds out of the mouths of relativists. Not each opinion, each taste and each preference is unique. Not at all. Many of them are very similar. People can be categorized into groups whether they like it or not. Ask a market researcher. He can confirm it to you. If really everyone would be different, then also taste would be absolutely unique. Then it wouldn't become impossible to do any advertising for a product in an efficient manner, as the advertising campaign only would appeal to the taste of just one person on this world, as everyone is different or not. Wouldn't then also the taste of each individual be different? You see what I mean? It's so easy to disprove such relativistic shallowness. If you know the allocation on percent of the total volume of all preferences, opinions, and tastes, then you have already a lot of useful knowledge gathered. Knowing that allocation is decisive in marketing but also in life. Ask again a market researcher. Many of these people know their business well. Success proves them right. Sometimes I almost die of laughter when I see ads, which suggest to the buyer a higher individuality by buying the advertised product. A contradiction in itself. My God, the product is everything else than individual. It is normed, as everything else would be a nightmare for manufacturing. Same applies to the individual buyer. In fact, he corresponds to a certain buyer group. I do not believe in the relativity of all terrestrial. Einstein in honor. Relativity is well applicable in physics, but not when it comes to human values. And that's the point where I am aiming at. There is an overriding moral truth. A point of view that is rated better under clearly defined moral and ethical criteria than others. This is the point of view I try to find and apply in daily life. Regarding the moral and ethical criteria, the New Testament of the Bible offers a good point of orientation. Chapter 5. Broken Dreams on Broken Wings. There are none great developments nor progress, as long as there is still one unhappy child on earth. Albert Einstein. The next day Lagina was early in his office, like usually. As compensation he liked to do a longer lunch break, which he used for jogging, or he didn't a lunch break at all and went instead earlier home to do a tour on his bike. His physical fitness was sacred to him. His chance was that such behavior was tolerated by his work environment and even lauded, whereby the egoistic aspect got forgotten. namely that he was then present when he was of less use and then absent when his presence would be more needed. A new trainee would come today, and for the next time it was his duty to mentor him. He hated such duties. A rookie was nothing but a nuisance. If he had wanted to be a kindergarten clerk, he would have chosen a different career. Lagina had made it to his custom to cut the wings of trainees from the beginning on, so that they didn't come up with the idea of making career and later, when they would be full members of the police corps, attempt to surpass him. Suddenly somebody knocked at his door and he got pulled abruptly out of his thoughts. "Come in," yelled Lagina. A shy young man with glasses and wearing his hair parted to the right entered his office. He was clothed into a dark blue pullover with a V cleavage, underneath a white shirt, and there with a pair of black elegant pants. "There you got it," thought Lagina. "They send me the usual police academy faggot. My good. And something like that I have to carry around with me the next weeks." "Your name?" snapped Lagina at him unfriendly. Tazi is my name. I am the new." I know. Tazi, what else?" "Sergio Tazi." "Well, I am, as you surely know, Lagina. The Lagina, to be precise, and I want to be addressed only like that. Is that clear? Well then, take that footstool over there and place yourself at the front window." Sergio did as demanded by Lagina. While Sergio sat down, Lagina had a malicious grinning on his lips. Then today he had come early, not because he wanted to prepare himself for the trainee, like it could have been expected, by presenting him his actual cases and duties. No, he had come earlier to move Sergio's table closer to the window and to replace the chair by a footstool. The purpose of the whole action was that the trainee would be dazzled by the light while sitting on the uncomfortable footstool, and last but not least Lagina could keep an eye on him. Lagina simply loved living out those small malignities. It gave him a malicious pleasure. Already as a child he had enjoyed tremendously to play malicious pranks on others. Lagina's malice was inherited. It wasn't his fault. His father already had been that way, and before him his grandfather and probably also his foregrandfather. Like his father always told him, the inherited is more persistent than the bought. Whereby he was referring to temperamental qualities and not to material things. So it was lying in his nature to play pranks to others to satisfy his malicious need for that kind of pleasure, and he never had felt the urge to question himself concerning his character. He well remembered the day when his father had again a dispute with a neighbor at the time Lagina was a child, and how he afterwards took a Sanyo cassette recorder and recorded a whole cassette full of insults. Then he placed the cassette recorder on the veranda and played it for hours facing the neighbor's house. That grotesque action became a ritual, and that all because basically Lagina's father didn't have better to do, as he, like many other Italian citizens, lived from a disability pension paid to him by the government, even if he often did illegal cash-in-hand jobs. Surely a reason why the Italian national budget was not in an ideal condition. During decades people had gotten awarded disability pensions for minor ailments. It often was sufficient to know a doctor personally and make him happy with a courtesy whereby a good prosciutto was favored the most, and in an instant you had your certificate of disability which granted you the mentioned governmental pension. It was a usual practice, and so the welfare system got undermined. Well then, young fellow, let's start. Here you get your first case. He throws Sergio the files of the bizarre case regarding the killed Yorkshire Terrier on the table. Thinking to himself, let the newbie earn the laurels for that case, while he grinned inwards. In the meantime I will check if there are any new cases, said Lagina pompously. He sat in front of his notebook and, like every day, he scanned the database with the new cases. He poked around a while but didn't find anything special. Then he saw how suddenly an email appeared in his inbox. Who dared to disturb him now? Well, his dear boss, like every morning, sending him the cases he had assigned to Lagina. Today he got assigned a new case, as if he already hasn't enough work. Well, what was it this time? He overflew the content. It was a complaint against a Mr. Calvo regarding bilking. My God, why is he bothering me with such cases? Well then, also this case will be for the trainee. Sergi, come by. My name is Sergio, Mr. Gina. My name is Lagina, replied he harshly. It doesn't matter, Sergi, it's all the same. Come by my side now, I have an additional case for you. Sergio did like demanded. He quickly recognized that arguing was useless. The initiator of the claim was a certain Mr. Pergo. A kind of shady guy and owner of one of those drive-in motels which were placed along the auto route and mainly used to hook up with prostitutes. Well, Mr. Pergo was good prepared for bilking clients. He had arranged it in a way that the clients had to pass a camera-surveyed passage to get to the motel. On the screenshots he had added to his complaint, the plate number was very good visible, and on the right bottom corner was also a timestamp. On the first picture, which Sergio was looking at, he saw the time when the driver had arrived. On the second one, the time when he had left the motel. Unfortunately, the face was not very good recognizable because of the reflections on the windscreen, but the license plate number was very clear. 10 minutes later. In the meantime, Sergio had entered the license plate number into his PC and was very surprised when he saw the name of the holder on the screen, Giovanni Gabriel. Bingo! Wasn't that the top case at the moment, which also got mentioned in all the newspapers? Sergio did a printout of the road traffic department records including all the information on the holder and the vehicle and said then, "Mr. Lagina." "Yes, Sergi, you can also call me Mr. Gina. I will do an exception for you." He just loved to tease the trainee. Sergio ignored his provocation and answered him, "The vehicle of the bilking case is the vehicle of businessman Giovanni Gabriel. Hasn't he been reported as missing?" "Well, on one of the pictures I assume that we can see the kidnapper." Lagina opened his eyes wide and stood up abruptly. Then he quickly went over to Sergio and yelled, "Let me see it," while he ripped him the files out of his hands. He looked at the license plate register printout and at the pictures and said then surprised, "Indeed. Why should a wealthy businessman in the first place use a false name and afterwards leave the motel without paying? He surely was screwing a hooker there, like we all do occasionally, or maybe it was a lover, and then something must have happened and things got out of control. Yes, that's it. His lover maybe wanted to kidnap him to get a ransom payment, or the hooker's pimp got notice who this Mr. Calvo really was and kidnapped him for the same reason. Something like that must have occurred. Well done, boy, well done, but don't forget, I am Sherlock Holmes and you are Watson, is that clear?" Sergio looked confused at him. "You do understand me, don't you?" Lagina started to dislike Sergio more and more. Was he already trying to undermine his position? "Well, we have found here something very important that brings me forward in that case, Gabriel. The man is already missing since 2 days and there are no ransom demands, what is rather unusual. If he was kidnapped, what is very likely? We will put our hands on Mr. Pergo from the motel and squeeze out of him everything that can be squeezed out. He surely can provide us with more useful information. Gabriel must have met someone there. Probably even regularly. It is very probable that Pergo has seen that someone. Mamma mia! If his wife gets to know that." Lagina laughed in a dirty manner and slapped Sergio on the shoulder. The next day after the trial, Salvatore's mood was at a low-level point. He wasn't very confident regarding the further progress. He rather had a vague notion that it all would end in a half-hearted mediation offer or a non-guilty verdict for the witch, and in the worst case in a guilty verdict for himself. Maybe the police would track down somebody who could remember that the damned dog was not on a leash. If yes, there was still a small chance for him that the witch actually got convicted. But a lot of luck was necessary to achieve that goal, as usually many people had if they had to testimony against someone. Suddenly remarkable lapses of memory, they started to remember things incorrectly, got unsure and had the tendency to rather deny something than to affirm it. If the police didn't find any further witnesses, then Kantaris would get away with it. The more he thought about it, the more he started to dislike all of the possible endings. If she got convicted or not, what he most wanted was true retaliation. Retaliation like it was mentioned in the Bible, an eye for an eye. The kind of retaliation a court couldn't offer. The kind of retaliation probably most of the fathers would demand if they had lost their child in such a tragic way. Whether your child had been victim of a drunk guy that had committed a hit and run, or a sexual perverted had raped and killed it, or a stupid witch let her dog unleashed and the damned beast had attacked and bitten your child to death. All these fathers and mothers were unified by one wish: they wanted to see the culprits suffer and pay for their crimes. Surely more than one wished back the execution's methods from the medieval time. The times when delinquents were punished physically and had to support unimaginable pains as punishment for their deeds. No costly imprisonment for a lifetime, no caution, no fines, and no conditional imprisonment with a right to day pass where they could possibly commit further crimes. Nothing of all that crap, nothing but real vengeance. But these times were long gone, and that was okay. Salvatore did know all too well from his family history what it could mean when the arm of the law got too strong and powerful and therewith also got despotic. As son of gypsies, he knew that his grandparents had suffered bitter times during the regimen of Hitler. In view of his situation, the best solution commenced to seem to him to take things into his own hands with the risk of being caught, following Dostoevsky's motto, crime and punishment. Suddenly Salvatore had arrived at an emotional point in his life where he had started to get indifferent towards the risk of being caught if he applied self-justice. If the circumstances would allow it, he preferably would have marched into the courtroom and rammed a dagger into the witch's heart in front of all the audience. But unfortunately things weren't so easy. Along with that he would have to overpower the guard, he would only achieve with such an action that he would be also sentenced guilty or even shot on sight while trying it. Actually today this didn't matter to him, but another force was stronger. Such an act would have as consequence that he couldn't provide anymore for his 10-year-old son, and he didn't want to be remembered by the kid as murderer. Other plans started to grow within him while he was driving to the manual car cleaning facility Mobiclean. He drove in one of the cleaning boxes where you could clean your car with a high-pressure water jet. Then he dig out from his glove box some coins that he had stored for that occasion in a plastic bag, raised the windows and stepped out of the car. As he stood in front of the machine, he suddenly heard a terrible cry. Salvatore got frightened. It sounded like his daughter. But that wasn't possible. Was he now being haunted by hallucinations? Suddenly he heard the cry again, accompanied by a shrill female voice. "That serves you right, you naughty, naughty girl." Salvatore watched covertly around the corner of the cleaning box into the next box. He saw a woman who was holding roughly a tiny, barely 5-year-old girl by her arm and shaking her. Whereby the water high-pressure jet was not directed towards the car, but towards the small girl. "No, Mum, please don't," said the girl feebly as the mother started to hose her with the water jet on her chest. The girl cried in agony. Salvatore did a step forward. An inner voice told him to act immediately and to rip the water jet out of her hands. He couldn't permit such a cruelty to happen. No, he couldn't. "Bad girls get their punishment," snarled the mother at the girl. Salvatore now was standing a few steps behind the mother. She wasn't able to see him from her angle. Suddenly she activated again the trigger and hosed the girl on her right cheek. The girl raised the hand to block the water jet. The water jet stopped abruptly, accompanied by the girl's crying. The corners of her mouth moved downwards and tears started to roll over her cheek while she terribly sobbed. Salvatore retreated lightning quick back into his compartment. He hadn't intervened. The mother grabbed the girl and pushed her into the car. Then she said, "I hope this was a lesson to you, and now I don't want to hear a tone from you." At home, she dragged the girl out of the car and maneuvered her into the shabby house. The plaster at the front was already falling apart. Salvatore had followed them unnoticed. At the last moment, he had decided not to interfere at the car wash facility. In this case, he wanted to reach more. At the car wash facility, he could have easily stopped the mother from hosing the girl again. He could have grasped her hand, turn it around, and hinder her to hurt the girl again. For a short moment, the girl would have been saved from her torment. But the mother probably would have caused a tumult and would have denied everything by arguing that the girl had hurt herself somehow else. Because of the tumult, probably someone would have called the police. They all would have been brought to the police station. The girl eventually would have said nothing out of fear. If yes, nobody would have believed her at the moment, as it was unimaginable that a mother could do something similar. If the police would have nevertheless confirmed that the mother was guilty of such an atrocity, they would have instantly relieved her from custody. The girl would have been placed at a foster home or a children's home, where she could talk of luck if she survived her childhood without further mistreatments. Salvatore wanted to prevent all that from happening. That's why he hadn't acted precipitated, but waited a moment. After a short moment, he had worked out a vague plan, so he rang the doorbell. The mother was lying inside on the sofa and grunted, alarmed by the doorbell. Who dared to disturb her in her afternoon relaxation? She didn't want to be disturbed right now, that's why she decided to ignore the bell. The bell rang again. This time Salvatore held down the button. The pungent shrill tone pressurized her to pick herself up and shuffle to the door. She, the seriously ill poor woman. A working accident had hurt her heavily at the shoulder. Since 2 years now she was reported as ill, that's why she had applied for a disabled pension. And now she got mistreated by a pushy door-to-door salesman. "You miserable scumbag, now you are in trouble," thought she on her way to the door. With a jerk she opened the door and yelled, "Yes, what do you want?" Calmly Salvatore replied, I am from the electricity company and are here to read of the electric meter in the house. Electric meter? We don't have such a thing here, bickered she. I hear a TV in the corridor, the light is on. All those things need electricity. So, of course you do have an electric meter, and if it turns out that you are obtaining your electricity without paying, you also have a big problem. Her aggressiveness dropped remarkably. The threat had unfolded its desired effect. Well then, come in. This thing must be somewhere, maybe in the storeroom. Salvatore entered the house. Suddenly she said, "No, wait a moment," and pushed him back, but Salvatore didn't let her push him back and remained rigid on the same spot. "Show me an identification. Otherwise anyone could ring the bell and enter my house with a pretext," said she resolute, and showed him the palm of her hand to indicate him that she was expecting his identification card. Salvatore started to rummage in his bag while he held it up at the same time so that she wasn't able to see what was in the bag, whereby it was very convenient to him that the woman was rather small. Then he said, "Nope, sorry, I don't have it with me today." "Then leave immediately my house," ordered she. "Well then, you wanted it this way." He reached into his bag and brought out a notebook. On that notebook he wrote with a stick shorthand and speaking out loud the words, "Electric meter inspection refused." Inspector didn't have his identification card. Suspicion of obtaining electricity illegally. "Does that fit the situation?" asked he, and showed her what he had written on the pad. She looked perplexed at him, then he said harsh to her, "Now the only thing I need from you is your full name and your signature. I will fill in the address later." She still looked perplexed at him while he went on and said, "I am waiting." "Well then, you annoying fellow. Back there is the storeroom with the electric meters," said she, enervated, and pointed to the back of the corridor. Salvatore was watching at a long corridor which was covered with a flower design wallpaper from the 70s. From that barely illuminated corridor several rooms went away to the left and right. At the end of the corridor, on the left side, he heard a TV blare. It sounded like one of those mindless afternoon shows where a lot of people display themselves deliberately in order to humiliate or defame each other in public. Salvatore had had a look at such shows and was upset over the fact how fearless some people were giving them away into ridiculousness. He had the strong impression that all these shows were staged, probably like so many programs broadcasted on TV. The actors were by all appearances unemployed, pensioners, outlaws, cast-offs, and curiosities of the society which were willingly disgracing themselves for people of their kind. Salvatore went along the corridor, closely followed by the mother, which then stopped at the door to the living room and waited until he reached the storeroom. He opened the storeroom and peeked in, searching in vain for a light switch. So he fetched a flashlight out of his bag and searched with it the room. And there it was. Back in the corner there was a panel with several electric meters mounted on it. He went over to the electric meter, got a calculator and the notepad out of his bag and said to the mother, which still was standing at the doorframe, "There it is, the good old thing, then let's get started. I will need a while to gather the data and at the same time calculate for you approximately how much the electricity of the past period will cost you." Indifferently she went back into the living room and left the door ajar. Instantly Salvatore left the storeroom and sneaked to the living room. She had left open a tiny gap through which he now peeked into the living room. The girl was sitting on the opposite side of the mother in a ca 120 centimeters high metal case, how it typically was used for holding dogs, and was playing with a doll which had lost her head. Suddenly the girl saw how Salvatore peeped into the room, but she didn't react. She had seen him already once before, previously at the car wash facility. The mother had drooped herself into the sofa and sustained her head with her left arm while she was holding a glass in her right hand. On the colorful paneled salon table was standing a bottle of cheap red wine. The floor was covered with all kind of used handkerchiefs, crumps, and other stuff. It seemed that she didn't take it all too serious with the cleanliness. Salvatore's contempt for the mother grew exponentially as he saw in what kind of mess and chaos, not to say dunghill and pigpen, she forced her daughter to reside, besides mistreating her constantly. What kind of cruel mother she had to be. He paused for a moment, frightened by the terrible thought that had come just in that moment to his mind and which took away his breath for an instant. It was very probable that there were numerous, thousands, maybe even millions of parents worldwide which did the same. To treated their children in the same cruel way like this bulky, fat monster on the sofa did. Parent monsters that did that and even worse to their children. Alone the imagination of such a tremendous burden for the children and their immense sorrow overwhelmed him for a short moment, and he realized that with his intervention on this single case, compared to the total amount of sorrow, would have a minor effect. But it would have an effect. For this girl it would mean a lot to see that she was not alone, to see that somebody in this world offered her help, that somebody had taken notice of her pain and agony, and that somebody took her side. His intervention would fortify her self-confidence and fill her life for a little moment again with some kind of happiness. The anticipation of a failure when interfering and helping, or the assumptions you can't do something as an individual, and it is only one case of so many, so it doesn't change anything if you interfere. These kind of attitudes were based on a wrong point of view of life, thought Salvatore. Then if many people would change their attitude and behavior, then also a lot of injustices could be prevented or at least avenged. Just imagine if it would get generally known that you had to count with a retaliation for any kind of injustice you did to another person. Salvatore didn't have in mind just the injustices that were brought to the surface, the ones that you could hear about in the news, which were investigated by the police, the authorities, or other organizations, but also all the injustices, which didn't see the daylight, which happened covertly in the daily life and often hadn't more witnesses than the aggressor and the victim. These injustices were those who bothered him the most. In the case of the entrepreneur Giovanni Gabriele, he hadn't been so aware of all these aspects. His attention towards him had been attracted by his job at the media. He had caught that Gabriele's company fired several employees even if they were making enormous profits, and at the same time he forced the remaining employees to sign new working contracts with much lower salaries. That had bugged him. He was very enraged, and that's why he had decided to take revenge in the name of all the victims of Gabriele and to make him pay for his misdeeds. He saw his actions as justified, and he was convinced of them. And what would happen if in the future, in such cases like the one of Gabriele, of which the media reported regularly, afterwards the same would happen to those inhuman entrepreneurs like it happened to Gabriele? Well then, those cases wouldn't surely happen so often, thereof Salvatore was convinced. The powerful would get aware that they are not almighty, that they are no gods, that they are people like the others, and that they had no right to decide over the fate of others in that extent like they did actually. Mostly those omnipotent managers weren't even the original founders of the company, which ones at least had created something, they simply were also employees. But employees that took themselves too important, employees that had forgotten that the whole company wouldn't be able to function without the work of the other employees. The overwhelming multitude of thoughts, which like a huge wave, or more like a rock fall, had descended upon him, had crippled him for an instant. The mother suddenly noticed the girl's frozen glimpse towards the door. When she turned around and saw Salvatore standing at the door, she wasn't scared, but rather disgusted, what on the other hand surprised him. "What in the devil's name?" yelled she, then stood up surprisingly quick and threw the glass, which she had in her hand, towards him. "Go to hell, you bastard," he just heard before he was barely able to evade the glass, which hit the door frame and then fell to the floor. She had reached the door amazingly fast and launched herself on him with stretched arms and clawed fingers ready to stranglehold him. Salvatore had regained his composure and grabbed her wrists. She raised her knee, trying to hit his genitals. He parried her attack by turning lightning to the side and raising on his part also his knee. She pressed herself on him. Salvatore fell backwards and was just able to turn to the side together with her, so that both of them fell in a sideways position to the floor. They had fell into the corridor, the legs still under the doorframe. In that position they rolled from one side to the other, struggling together. Both were trying to get the upper hand and to manage to sit on the adversary. "You damn asshole, you swine. What do you want from us?" bickered she continuously and spit at him. Salvatore managed to twist her hands to the side and gave her at full force a headbutt. Her nose started to bleed and her pupils dilated from the shock, then she grabbed her bleeding nose and her forces started to cease. Salvatore stood up and found skillfully his way behind her. He grabbed her arms and bent them backwards. Now she was lying in a very awkward position on the floor. Then Salvatore dragged her in that position backwards through the corridor while she was struggling with her legs and continued to yell, "Let me go, you bastard. Let me go." He saw her dormitory, and on a clothes rack there was hanging a belt that could be useful to him to handcuff her. So he pulled her into the dormitory and she started to yell, "Swine. You want to rape me? Let me go." Her voice sounded shrill and at the same time scared. With all his power, Salvatore pressed her wrists together so that he could hold her hands with only one hand, then he grabbed after the belt, but she used the opportunity to break away from him. "Now you will see. You will see," said she with a threatening tone. She stormed out of the room towards the kitchen. Salvatore rushed behind her. In the kitchen, she grabbed a bread knife and swung it with her right hand against Salvatore. He parried her attack by hitting strongly with his side of the hand against her wrist, then grabbed her hand and hit it several times against the edge of the kitchen dresser until she finally let the knife go. The whole fight had been taken unexpectedly long as she was persistent and powerful. Salvatore had clearly underestimated her, but the last strokes had caused her visible pains. She had now tears in her eyes. Again with a changed voice tone she moaned, "Please stop. Enough. Stop. I haven't done you anything," and retreated slowly some steps back and leant against the refrigerator. Salvatore went quick towards her, grabbed her right arm and twisted it so that she turned to the left. Subsequently, he choked her with his right arm by squeezing his arm around her throat while he was still twisting her arm behind her back. Finally, he had her under his control. "Oh, that hurts," yelled she. "Does it hurt you the same way like that what you did to your daughter in the car wash facility?" answered Salvatore her harshly. Then he dragged her through the corridor back into the living room to her daughter, which still was sitting in the animal cage like a prisoner. The child was sitting motionless at the same place, still holding her decapitated puppet in her hand. Salvatore was worried. Did that girl already experience so many aggression in his short life that she wasn't upset by the ongoing scenes? Any other child would have started to cry, why didn't she? He started to question his actions again. What could he to achieve in this whole situation with his intervention? The whole intervention hadn't been planned very well by him. Had all of this maybe been a mistake? Damn. Then he did the nearest reasonable action. He said to the mother, "Apologize yourself and beg your daughter for pardon. Right now." The mother hesitated, so Salvatore distorted her arm harder. She yelped in pain, then she stammered, I am sorry," while she starred at the floor. "Is that everything you got to say to her?" said Salvatore doubtfully. "Look your daughter in the eyes and ask her sincerely for forgiveness and get her finally out of this damn cage," ordered he. She reached with her left hand forward and unlocked the cage. The girl still was sitting at the same spot and stared at her with wide open eyes. "You can come out, sweetie," said Salvatore cautious to her. As if she had awaited that moment imploringly, she carefully pushed the door. But before she did a step outside of the cage, she looked at the mother to get her approval. The mother saw her look and said impatiently, "Do what he says and come out." Then she suddenly yelped as Salvatore distorted again her arm and said, "Can't you say that also a little bit friendlier?" The girl recoiled back into the cage. The mother then said to her with unusual smooth voice, "Please come out, Patricia, please." Patricia did as asked and left the cage. The moment she stood in front of them, Salvatore noticed a light similarity with his daughter, but maybe he was mistaken. At this point, any young girl had some similarity to his deceased daughter Alice. With his arm he squeezed now the mother's throat harder so that she didn't get any air. The mother tried to hinder him by grabbing clumsy with her left hand his arm, but he squeezed her even harder so that she finally went down on her knees and bent forwards. Then she raised her head up towards Patricia and begged her, "Patricia, please help me." "Get me please," said she gasping. "Yes, mother. I get you a glass of water from the kitchen." Then she left the room and went indeed towards the kitchen. Salvatore didn't know how this whole thing would come out. He started to question himself again if he hadn't done a big mistake. Most probable the young girl would ran out of the house and call the police, or the mother would beat the daylights out of the girl as soon as he left. And he couldn't keep watch and guard her forever by standing here. Patricia returned from the kitchen. In her hand she didn't have a glass of water, as expected, but a bread knife. Salvatore got scared and his pupils dilated. Then the last thing he wanted is to hurt the kid. Patricia registered it instantly. She was used to read in faces and interpret minimal changes in facial expressions. She had to learn it during all the years of her martyr. She had to learn to interpret the mimic of her mother correctly to act preventive, to save herself at least some beatings. It meant some painless. The mother awakened to life again. With a jolt she tried to break away from Salvatore's grip, but he was expecting it. Again he reinforced his grasp. She started to yell. She yelled, "Stab out, Patricia. Stab out. Kill this bad man. He is hurting Mummy." Patricia did a step towards them, raised her arm and stabbed out. Directly into her mother's stomach. The mother slumped down. Blood came out of her wound and gushed down. Salvatore was shocked, and also the mother hadn't expected something like that. Patricia was still holding the knife in her hand. She raised again her arm, ready to stab out again. Salvatore eluded to the right side, while Patricia executed a turn to the left where no one was standing and threw the knife at the wall. With a cold mind she returned to her cage. "Why did you do that?" gasped the mother. He's the criminal, not me. Patricia took her time to answer. Salvatore was staring at her mesmerized, then she answered, no, you are a bad mum and evil. You have hurt me. Really, really hurt me. With her words she wanted to tell her mother that she, her daughter, had not deserved to be treated like that by her, that her small insubordinations didn't have such a weight to be tormented by her mother like she usually did. She wanted to tell her that she still was a little kid, a kid in a weaker position, depending on her goodwill, having a right to be loved and be treated well. A kid that did not bear any guilt for her mother's failure as wife and in her life generally. A kid, yes, her kid, on which she did not have to abreact her frustrations. All that had now been said with this one stab, that cathartic act, that clearance of a scared and tormented child. Salvatore took the phone, which was lying on the table, and handed it over to the mother. Then he said to her, call an ambulance. She took the phone and wanted to enter the number of the ambulance. I don't know the number. Oh God, please help me, I am bleeding to death. 818, said Salvatore lapidary. What shall I say? Asked she with a thin voice. Salvatore hesitated a moment and answered then, tell them that you have attempted a suicide because you were not satisfied anymore with your situation in life and you didn't know what to do any further. The mother nodded and Salvatore prepared himself to leave. For the last time he looked at the girl's eyes and left then the house. In a miraculous way the stab hadn't damaged any vital inner organs. At the hospital they didn't really believe the mother's story. The wound and her other bruises told another story, but she held firm to her statement, and so they left it at that and didn't pursue the occurrence anymore. Chapter 6, The Magic Stick. The mask tells more about the human behind it than its face. Jean-Louis Barrault. La Guina went like a bull at a gate. Blunt, aggressive, and inappropriately harsh, he put the owner of the motel, Mr. Pergo, through the mangle. I am La Guina and that is my aide, said he with an incidental gesture while he practically pressed his badge into Mr. Pergo's face. Pergo stood up abruptly while La Guina already had lifted the barrier which blocked the way back to the reception desk where he was sitting and entered his sovereign territory, something usually no one dared to do. La Guina noticed immediately the staple of porn magazines which Pergo had hidden densely behind the desk. One of them was lying pitched there and showed women of all kind of age and forms. Crude, like La Guina was, he braced himself on the open magazine and sat then on the edge of the table. At the same time he grabbed Pergo at his shoulder and pressed him back into his yellowed armchair. Pergo did not resist him. Well then, let's start again. Yesterday you filled in a complaint for bilking. What do you know about the customer? Who was with him? Is he a regular customer? I want to know everything you know, preferably right now. Wait a minute, said Pergo hesitantly, I am here the cheated and... Listen, said La Guina in a threatening manner, I am not prepared to play games with you. It's an urgent matter. Top urgent. Do you understand? Hi capito. And if you do not cooperate, I have the localities closed for 1 month and call in all possible departments, the department for prostitution, the one for health inspectorate, and so on. Are we now on the same page? Pergo sank back into his armchair. He knew that there was no way to cope with such a tremendous asshole. In that the moment he felt really miserable. He, which normally was in charge in his small empire. He that was his own master was now sitting there in a brown t-shirt which he hadn't changed for days and that showed off his paunch and smelt of sweat. His own stink wasn't covered fully by the stench of the cigarette butts and the empty beer cans beside him. He just had wanted to take a time off with the porn mag and then came these 2 cops asking stupid questions. At least one of them. That was very annoying, he had nothing but trouble with the police. Pergo started to ask himself why he had done the denunciation. In the future he would spare himself the trouble with the denunciation and consequently ask for a higher prepayment also with regular customers. I know the guy under the name Calvo. In the past time he was almost every week here, started Pergo to tell. The words came like viscous molasses out of his mouth. La Guina had to let off some steam to control his temper, which was provoked by his impatience. Therefore he shouted at Sergio, come on boy, get a notepad and write down what he says. He oversaw that Sergio already was doing exactly that what he asked for so harshly. Pergo looked lightly confused to Sergio and continued saying, well, he meets regularly with a hooker called La Dura. Maybe she can help you further. I really don't know more. Really not? And where can we find these La Dura, Stronzo, said La Guina harshly and grabbed Pergo at the collar of his t-shirt. Pergo hesitated. Where? Yelled La Guina at him. Well, she has also other customers and will surely soon be here again. Otherwise I have no clue where she lives. That cop was about to ruin his business if he continued like that. Fuck. Why in God's name had he said anything to the police? Now we understand each other. Well then, give us a description of that lady and do not leave out any details, understood? A few hours later, Sergio Tazzi indeed saw a dark shape which had a high resemblance with the person described to them by Pergo walking to one of the motel rooms. Sergio shoved his boss's elbow slightly, which was sleeping and snoring since over an hour in the reclined car seat behind the wheel. He had bypassed the last hours with reading the protocol of the Yorkshire Terrier case, and afterwards he had listened to a few episodes of an audiobook. Actually, he was at Stephen King's Decay. An incredibly extensive book, in his opinion, were best managed by listening to the audiobook. Also, the whole Lord of the Rings saga he had managed that way, accompanied by extended walks through the forest. Generally, audiobooks were a handy thing, found Sergio, but right now they had more important things to do. Boss, there she is, boss. What? Lagina waked with a start from his sleep. What is it? Why do you call me boy? What do you want? There she is, boss, said Sergio and pointed at the motel room where the prostitute they were looking for was standing at the front door waiting to get in. Well, yes, damn it. You were right, there she is. He started a dirty laughter and slapped Sergio on the shoulder. I already started to think that in the density of the car you have become a faggot and you wanted to feel me up while I was sleeping. Then again he laughed and added, or are you already a faggot, and shoved him from the side with his elbow. Let's go, said he, then suddenly stepped out of the car and started to run towards the searched one. Half out of breath, with Sergio closely behind him at the drag rope, Lagina reached the women, which he deemed to be La Dura. The woman noticed immediately that something wasn't right and reached for her handbag to grab a pepper spray. Lagina pulled out his badge and stuck it in her face, while with the other hand he reached in his holster for his gun at the same time and yelled, "One wrong move and you will regret that you stood up this morning." Yes, calm down, big guy. Calm down. For you I am still Commissioner Lagina, capice? Snapped Lagina back at her. Is that so? Then she started laughing. Such men like you I get to see every day, in the meanwhile I cannot differentiate one loser from the other. Lagina got angry at her recalcitrance. Now listen well, you dazzling personality, I eat such folks like you for breakfast. He had his face now very close to hers. In his left hand he was still holding his badge, with the right arm he pressed her against her chest towards the door. Inside the motel room waited a frightened punter, watching through the cracks of the shutter and wishing to be at home with his wife. Boss, Mr. Lagina, shouldn't we ask her first if she is? Calm down, boy. He let go of La Dura and did some steps backwards. From a distance he first watched her from top to down. Not bad, thought he. Especially the tits. At the hips she is a little bit small, but in his trousers something got alive, disregarding his minor reservation. What do you know about Mr. Gabriel, alias Mr. Calvo, your customer? She hesitated a moment and said then harshly, what shall I know about him besides the usual lies and the same whining they all do, the dear punters? You won't believe what I have to do in psychological work, but I can tell you something about his sexual preferences. I know a lot about that. Cut the crap, will you? Interrupted Lagina her. Did you meet him 2 days ago? 2 days ago, let me think. You know, with so many customers, said she, laughing. Ah yes, now I remember. The bastard failed to turn up at our appointment. Are you sure? Probed Lagina further. His custom to treat everyone with disrespect while at the same time he expected to be treated with respect was in Sergio's opinion terrible. Now he enjoyed it that La Dura also treated Lagina with disrespect. Of course I am sure. Something like that doesn't happen to me every day, my dear boy. I am a popular personality, said she with a flirty smile on her lips. Then her facial expression changed suddenly and she got angry. And what do you care about, suck a prick? He is a real bastard. He humiliates women sexually, believe me, I know what I am talking about. Gives the impression of being honest, but takes always a line of coke and boasts to have the biggest dick. Actually, what is your real name? Can you identify yourself? Demanded Lagina harshly from her. La Dura started to laugh, and then she said to their both surprise, the way you are staring at me, you are more interested in knowing my bra size, don't you? How you dare, you, thundered Lagina. Boss. We should intervene, Sergio. Yes, it's all right, boy. Sergio's intervention provoked just in time a change of reasoning in Lagina. He couldn't afford any further claims for hurting people's rights. The 2 ones he already had ongoing were enough. Indeed, Lagina had gotten a slight erection at the sight of La Dura. It didn't happen unnoticed by her, and she asked provocatively, is the tiny one raising his head? "Dear ma'am," intervened Sergio, "I ask you again to identify yourself, otherwise we have to take you to the police station." "Sure, my boy. Who asks so nicely also gets a nice answer." Then she started to rummage around in her purse for her ID and showed it to Sergio. "Please, serve yourself." Sergio read the name on the ID card and looked at the picture, then he reached the ID over to La Gina without saying a word. The sight made him gasp, then he stuttered, "Romano Volpi," and threw the ID fully disgusted to the floor. "Hey, what are you doing? Do you think you can get away with everything because you are a cop?" said La Dura, agitated, and picked up the ID. "Well, that's the way it is. Your Gabriel was keen on trannies, does it matter? Let's have everyone what he likes. Maybe you have also secret wishes, who knows? Buried deep inside your heart." "Go to hell, you," said La Gina, angry, and raised his hand. La Dura started to laugh dirty and walked away. From apart she shouted at La Gina, "Now you know where you can find me, darling. Just in case you have the urge to meet my magic stick." Chapter 7. Over the clouds, freedom must be limitless. Fear is the dizziness of freedom. Søren Kierkegaard. Once again, good police work ended without any result. The possibility that Romano Volpi alias La Dura might have 2 days ago kidnapped Giovanni Gabriel was whether for La Gina nor for Sergio realistic. In the meantime, they were assigned to the case of the kidnapped businessman Gabriel, and they had gotten improved the picture they got from Pergo's observation camera from a forensic technician. The kidnapper's face on the picture was still not very good recognizable. Unfortunately, the face wasn't very distinctive. His most noticeable attribute were the buttons looking like stars which were situated at the collar of his jacket. It was already getting night when La Goanna steered at the Central Station Bistro to make a short stop. Always a good place to meet snitches. He had his methods, those kind of methods you weren't taught at the police academy. Now it was about time to initialize the boy correctly and introduce him into an important aspect of classical police work. They entered together the localities. La Gina was at the front. From outside, the bar looked shabby like most of the Central Station restaurants. Inside, it was adorned with artificial palm trees and all kind of Caribbean rubbish. Posters at the walls were announcing salsa music happenings. They both sat on stools at the bar. A well-built black girl came from the other side of the counter towards them and asked with a friendly smile on her full lips and honey in her voice, "What would you like to drink, sweeties?" Whereby she braced one hand on her hips and the other one on the counter. It did not went unnoticed by Sergio that La Gina was staring at her. Himself, he also felt a kind of attraction. "Please, bring us 2 beers, my sweet flower," asked La Gina her. He said that in a tone of which Sergio never would have believed him capable. That's why he didn't detain him from ordering him a beer during the working hours. He recognized that this moment was convenient to bring their relationship on a higher level and decided to enjoy the moment and take his chance. The black girl drew 2 beers and put them on the counter. La Goanna said to her while he watched deeply in her eyes and with the same voice from earlier, "Gracias, mi amor." She stroked his hand softly and word in Portuguese, "Você é adulator." La Gina grabbed his beer and said cheers to Sergio. "Well then, boy, to us." "To us, boss." La Gina started to lecture, "The classical policeman can't be without snitches. Snitches are people who are wandering on a thin ridge between the criminal world and the police world. To build up a contact with snitches is a delicate matter. You need a lot of tact. First you need to identify them and then you have to approach them carefully. No other place is more adequate to do so than the rail station bistro. A place of central importance as it attracts these folks like magic. A snitch always expect also a certain reward in form of certain particular rights which allow himself to remain in some cases above the law. Also therefore the policeman needs an excellent feeling for what is acceptable and what not. Sergio was listening to Gina's statements interested and patient, whereby he let run over his sight across the locality. Suddenly he interrupted his boss, totally agitated. Boss there." "My God, what's the matter, Sergio?" reacted La Gina, irritated. Just now as he had started to like Sergio slightly. "Boss, honestly, I think I have spotted the kidnapper of Gabriel." "What, where?" "He just passed by in front of the window." "Are you sure?" "Yes, boss. He has a resemblance to the guy on the picture of Pergo's surveillance camera, and also the star symbols are on the jacket's collar." La Gina hesitated slightly, took a last swig of beer and said hasty, "Let's go and get him." Outside they quickly caught up to him, and as they almost had caught him up, La Gina said in a harsh tone, "Hey you, freeze. This is the police. We want to see your ID." The man suddenly stood still as if he had been caught doing something wrong. "Turn around, I want to see your face," demanded Lagina. The man turned around. He was wearing a cap and his face was difficult to recognize as the street lamp lighted behind him. And now the ID card, and while he said that he was holding his badge in front of him. The man said friendly, "Yes, a moment please," and reached into his inside pocket. Hey, easy," was Lagina barely able to say as the man grabbed him lightning fast at his arm and threw him with a strong flip towards Sergio. They both fell on the floor. His surprise attack had succeeded. Then he ran away quickly. He ran like the devil was behind him. Sergio and Lagina got back on their feet and started the persecution. Freeze, yelled Lagina constantly, but it brought him nothing. The man continued undeterred his escape. At this time there weren't a lot of people waiting for the train on the tracks, and the man had almost reached the end of the tracks. He was sitting in a trap, there was no escape possible. But damned, what was that? The stranger suddenly jumped across the rail tracks to the other side. He managed the tracks practically with 4 jumps as if he was a feline predator. Lagina pulled out his gun and yelled, "Freeze, you monkey, otherwise I will shoot you," while Sergio tried to cross the tracks. He needed a lot more time than the stranger. The lights of an approaching train and the noisy announcements over the loudspeakers frightened him. Lagina shot. The stranger winced. Did he get hit? Suddenly the chase grabbed one of the pillars of the rail tracks roofing and started to climb up. The stranger climbed up in a remarkable velocity as if he hadn't done nothing else in his life. Lagina and Sergio were perplexed, but then Lagina quickly composed himself and shot a second time. The stranger laid down flat on the roof. "Come on boy, show me what you are capable of. Get up there." Sergio looked baffled at Lagina, showing him a face that said, "Seriously? Come on, go," impelled Lagina him. "At your age I was agile like a weasel." A likely story, thought Sergio. Sergio grabbed the pillar with his hands and braced himself with his feet against it. It cost him an enormous effort, that's why he groaned and then continued to slowly climb up. At the police academy they had done similar exercises, and already there he wasn't one of the best. He asked himself how the chase had been able to do it so easily. Finally he had reached the top. Sergio watched to the left and right. Where was the guy? Back there. He had crawled to the small pedestrian's bridge, which ran across the rail tracks into the adjacent living quarters. "What is he doing? What's going on? Do you see him?" shouted Lagina from below. Sergio took a closer look. The advanced nightfall only allowed him to see the man shadowy, but now he saw how the stranger was taking a run up and tried to reach the border of the bridge above him with a jump. "Go over there. Arrest him. What are you waiting for?" Sergio looked again in the direction of the chase and recognized that he had to act now. The man was hanging at the lower part of the bridge and started to pull himself up. Soon he would be up and away. Sergio started to run. Down at the rail tracks Lagina was cursing. Eventually he also called for reinforcement. Sergio wasn't able to determine it correctly. The stranger had managed to grab steel beam of the bridge and slowly pulled himself up. Sergio would soon have reached him. Because of the climbing he was still exhausted, but he mobilized his last power reserves and spurted towards him. He made a jump with the intention to grab his leg, but only managed to grab the lower part of his trousers. With a final jerk the stranger pulled himself up and Sergio slipped off. "Shit!" yelled Sergio. The stranger had managed to escape. Afterwards Lagina asked him why he hadn't used his gun, and he admitted that he hadn't expected that his first arrest would be so dramatic. He also hesitated to use his gun and to take aim at someone. In his opinion, Lagina was reckless, constantly violating the rule that they only were allowed to shot at someone who was also armed and threatening them. Salvatore laid down on his bed, still in his clothes. He had a very exhausting day behind him. First the trial, then the occurrence with the mother and her daughter, and at least the chase by the police. He was surprised how fast they had gotten to him, or had it been a pure coincidence that he had gotten into a routine check and that he had overreacted? Did he have a wrong image of the police? Were they more efficient than he assumed, or had they just had a lucky strike? But he wasn't ready to give up so easily, therefore he had too much things in mind which he wanted to resolve. He wished the police would also be so efficient with the investigations regarding the case of his daughter, and then his thoughts started to turn again around that what he held dearest. There was a thing that racked his brain during the rest of the evening. How could he take revenge on that which Serafina Cantaris without being related to it? Salvatore had the longer the more the uncomfortable feeling that the trial would not lead to the desired result, and he also feared that the police could soon catch him. Should he simply pursue her after the next trial? Surprise her and strangle her with his bare hands? He would have loved to do so, but what if someone saw him, or if she fought back and he left proofs at the crime scene, which was highly probable? He didn't want to be connected with her death. How could he kill her without leaving traces? Should he maybe make her disappear completely? Suddenly the mother and the child at the car wash came to his mind. That little child, which thanks to his intervention had dared to revolt against the injustice that had been done to her. All the mixed-up thoughts got him tired until he was lying half awake there and he fell into a lucid dream. Images from the past came up to his mind. Salvatore saw himself as a boy, how he was flying across the air. He saw himself on the trapeze swinging from one edge to the other, then balancing on a tightrope with a stick in his hand on which he had some rotating rings, and then he juggled with cones. 6 of them. His heart swelled of joy. Yes, once he had led another life as son of a circus family which had its origins with the Romani. There he had lived an unusual childhood. A childhood like maybe a lot of children dreamed of, full of attractions and thrilling experiences. His father had been Romani, his mother the daughter of the director of a small traveling circus. For years they moved from town to town, mostly small towns and communities. Constantly new artists joined or left them. And suddenly things started to go wrong. The visitors stayed away. His grandfather on his mother's side died. And finally they had to close the circus. His parents felt in a deep grief, and one day both were found dead. They had preferred to part from life than to make themselves dependent from the charity of others. Salvatore stood with his 19 years suddenly alone there, confronted with a world made for conformists, for those who fitted in, for followers and yes-sayers. A world where there was no place for persons with their own will who got spine and a strong character. He saw himself confronted with the requirement to fit himself into the common working world. Initially he tried to find a job in another circus, but they only hired artists and co-workers for a temporary period. Also was the competition ample, and it wasn't any more the life that Salvatore wanted to lead. He had loved his circus and detected now that those times were irretrievably lost forever. Years later, one day when his agony was once again at its peak, he made the acquaintance of a wonderful woman while he was sitting on a park bench which was situated on an idyllic island nearby the river dam. It was a place where Salvatore was able to charge up his batteries and where he liked to relax. She talked to him and asked if she could take a picture of him with her camera. Afterwards they both quickly got into an inspiring conversation. It appeared that she was a photographer and always looking for a particular snapshot. They both got in love, and soon out of love a child was born, their son Michel. The joy was great, but dark clouds were coming up and dimming the young happiness. Everything had gone very fast. Too fast. Her father, himself owner of a photographer's studio in the old town, didn't accept Salvatore from the beginning on. In his opinion, Salvatore didn't fit into the family. A traditional middle-class family which had managed across a few generations to get to certain wealth. A wealth which her father saw endangered by Salvatore's possible marry into the family. They didn't lack of property and money, he on the contrary would bring nothing into the marriage. The daughter was used to get supported with everything that got into her mind, particularly in financial matters. But as her father noticed that she held on to Salvatore, his support for her run dry soon. And as she was not able anymore to pursue her job as usual, as their child took too much of her time and being mother simply wasn't so exciting like she had imagined it, and moreover Salvatore didn't earn enough to fulfill all her material needs. Her love for him fainted quickly. It disappeared so quickly, like it had come as it was standing on a weak base. Mostly she had liked from Salvatore that exotic element which had fascinated her about him back in time. But as time went by, the bewitching effect of the exotic element ceased, and in lieu thereof the disillusioning reality had moved up, which accentuated the distinctions between them in an unpleasant manner. They break up, and only one thing remained Salvatore from her, the photographic skills she had taught him. Using that, he was able to sporadically get assignments as freelance photographer for magazines and newspapers. Some of them started to hire him also regularly, so he was able to make his living with that. So he had managed to do the step into the new serious world, and at the same time still was able to preserve a great piece of personal freedom. Chapter 8. The Wimp Man. The loneliness of the one is his escape as sick person, the loneliness of the other is his escape from sickness. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. Dreams can be healing, they can indicate you the future, steal your sleep, let you live out your wildest fantasies, and what they also can is provide you ideas and solution approaches for actual problems in your life. Sometimes they only provide you with a tiny impetus, a tiny idea, and a sparkle. Mostly that suffices. Through his dreams regarding the circus, Salvatore had come to an idea overnight, which gave him a new mood boost. It could be a possibility to accomplish what he desired most. He spent the day at the library doing researches, a place where he liked to spend his time. Since a while now, Salvatore had following opinion. If people would more often widen their horizon by reading, there would be a lot less misunderstandings, as reading helps understand. The only requirement is a skeptical mind, otherwise reading also can manipulate, as you can't just let in everything unverified. While reading, Salvatore often had a lot of thoughts. In his diary, he usually liked to write down his philosophical thoughts. Fragment out of Salvatore's diary. Do you know Hitler's book, My Fight, in German, Mein Kampf? Probably from hearsay, as most people. Well, I have bothered around with that crap for 2 weeks and read it from the first to the last page. Atrocious. Unbearable. And if you think that it commences so harmless. The criminal, well, the arsonist, who has incited a whole nation not only to burn books but also humans, presents himself at the beginning as misunderstood artist. Increments gradually his tirades of hate against everything and everybody. Gives instructions and lays down rules how life has to be lived and towards what society has to orientate itself, and names finally unambiguous his goals and intentions. I often think by myself that none of those ignorants, which call themselves today neo-Nazis or real patriots, ever have read the book, although they like to brag about it. Most likely they only know passages out of it, eventually passages that have been altered, otherwise they would have seen that her kind was entitled by their beloved leader as human material that only was a mean to realize his own personal goals. Stupid, submissive, weak-willed, modest, and easy to exploit to acquire the desired political power. From an actual point of view, it is not understandable how he managed to lead so many people around by the nose, while he spoke bluntly in his 2-volume book about his plans to manipulate and utilize the masses. He even revealed detailed instructions how it had to be done. Virtually learning material for prospective dictators. Well then, how was he able to deceive them all? And please consider that that son of the devil, yes, that's how I want to call him, published his first book already in 1925 and the second one in 1926. His terror regime lasted from 1933, 1945 and the Second World War from 1939, 1945. It becomes difficult to affirm that nobody knew in advance that what his intentions were when he had it written down explicitly. Yes, equal to a confession in advance, he served the readers of his literary outpouring the plain truth. How was he then able to dupe so many people? How? Well, obviously in a very easy manner, by finding plentiful of proponents which had a similar sadistic disposition as he had but wanted to act in a tactical, complete different matter. So they slipped over thankfully the cloak that gave their criminal acts the desired absolution. The cloak of absolution came in form of the following statements and systems of belief: that's the order, our leader wants it that way, this is an instruction coming from above, and so on. And how is the situation today? Well, today the managers tell us point blank what matters to them. And that is the profit, the maximizing of income, the optimizing of processes, the increase of margin, and the augmentation of the sales market. The order is not anymore, this one you have to kill, but instead this is how you have to perform. To keep it simple, they shout more, more, more. Do it better and faster. Be stronger, try harder. And what do the marketing and advertising experts tell us? They tell us what is hip, what is in and out. They create unique selling propositions and lead us around by the nose. Their precept is, this is what you have to like, this is what you have to buy. And then we go the press. They tell us daily what our opinions have to be like. How we have to look at things and occurrences and how to value them. Their motto is, this is what you have to think. They all tell us clear as daylight that it isn't about benevolence or mutual respect they are worried about. Not to mention that they do not care about who we are and what we want. How can we just overlook these facts? How can we just go on pretending everything is just all right? Yes, how can we declare their goals as ours and indulge us into the illusion that if we devote us just enough and sell them our dignity that we could also receive a piece of the cake of power? That we finally would get more power and autonomy over our lives? How can we be so naive? Well, there was an author who preached just the opposite of Hitler. Today almost nobody knows him anymore. The general public at least not, and his values even less. His name was Eric. From his values were those of humanism. I will make sure that that changes. If necessary by enforcement. In a way, I am sorry to think like that, and I know that my acting surely wouldn't be in the sense of from. He has tried it the nice way and has failed. Eric, I am sorry for you. I am sorry to act contrary to your philosophy to be able to enforce it. The same day the police received a call. The caller was a dockworker which had found a nearly dead man in an empty container which he was about to load with goods. He affirmed that he hadn't touched him, and in his voice consternation was clearly hearable. When the ambulance and the police arrived at the side, the nurse noted that the man was extremely dehydrated, so that they brought him directly to the emergency. Internally, the police informed immediately Commissioner Lagina because a policeman had recognized the dehydrated man. It was the abducted entrepreneur Giovanni Gabriele. So for the second time in a short period, Lagina had to enter a hospital, this time accompanied by Sergio. But that didn't alleviate his discomfort. As most of the people, he disliked hospitals. This was aggravated by the fact that the doctor told him that it was uncertain when a questioning of Giovanni Gabriele would be possible. So they left resignedly the hospital, went to the police headquarters and issued a local police warrant. Something that Lagina did unwillingly. He would have preferred to arrest the wanted kidnapper by himself. This would have brought him more fame. At least that was his original plan. But there was one thing he could do. He could question Gabrielle's wife to find out if he had enemies. Maybe she was able to give him a useful clue that could lead him directly to the kidnapper. The conversation with Gabrielle's wife didn't work out as Lagina originally had planned it. He felt her variations of mood between the disgraceful mix of sadness and happiness regarding the kidnapping and retrieve of her husband as quite annoying. He had difficulties to hold back in not shouting at her that she shouldn't act so bitchy in her ivory palace. But when he told her about La Dura, the hooker which Gabrielle had regularly encountered in the motel, something he deeply regretted afterwards, but he had felt obliged to do, as she didn't stop asking again and again about the reason why Gabrielle was in that motel, well, as he told her about La Dura, she completely lost it. First she felt in a crying fit, then her mood changed suddenly. She got into a rage and cried throughout the whole house while at the same time she was threatening and badmouthing. Then she swore to get her revenge in form of a divorce and threw Lagina and his assistant Sergio out, and the very same day she engaged a divorce advocate. As the library was about to close its doors, Salvatore was still there as one of the last. A library co-worker had already announced several times over the speaker that the library would close soon and that everyone had to leave it. Salvatore borrowed quickly 3 books, then he left finally the library and felt the urge to treat himself to his favorite espresso from Lavazza, and he could look at the people amble along. Shortly thereafter took the bus, got off at his usual bus station and started to walk through the railway underpass towards his quarter. It was the shortest way to his home, and somehow he liked that underpass. It was about 8 meters wide and a few hundred meters long. At one end it led to the railway station, which was situated in the center of the city, also a few smaller stores were there, and at the other end it got directly through a long ascent into his living quarter. Suddenly he heard a rolling noise, but it did surprise him, then as so often a few juveniles were descending the ascension with their skateboards. You surely didn't have to be a top boarder to pull off that stunt. A good sense of balance was enough, as at the end of the ascension you simply could let roll out the board. They were 3 boys that came hurtling at him. All 3 of them side by side. That's why they needed a lot of space, and the pedestrians felt obligated to step aside and squeeze themselves to the wall if they wanted to avoid a collision. Salvatore looked at it as a provocation by rowdy and rebellious teenagers. That's why he continued along his way, but didn't evade them when they came approaching him. Out of pride, but also to show them that he wasn't intimidated. Quite tight they tear-pasted him. One of them brushed him as he was obligated to evade him. Suddenly he heard further below a scream. He turned quickly his head and saw how one of the juveniles had collided with a man there where the ascension was already flattening a little bit. "Can't you pay attention, for eyes?" grumbled the teenager and stood up. The man on the other hand remained on his knees on the floor. The teenagers now started to encircle him. "Don't you have eyes?" "For eyes?" It was a reference to the thick glasses he was wearing. "Come on, answer me," said the teenager with the black and white plaid hood jacket and the trousers which were far too big, in a clear aggressive tone. Suddenly he gave the man on the floor a clout. The man contracted his head and the other 2 teenagers laughed at him. He still hadn't spoken a word. For eyes," chanted they. For eyes. He does not only see a thing, he also doesn't hear a thing. "Let him in peace," said Salvatore suddenly to them. He had descended the ascending and had approached them without being noticed. "What's your problem? Are you looking for trouble? Why do you interfere? He said. The youngster with the plaid jacket grabbed his board and positioned himself threatening with a stretched chest in front of Salvatore, while the others too also took their boards in their hands. Leave him alone, said Salvatore again with a tone in his voice which made his determination very clear while he was hiding his fists in the pockets of his jacket. Tom, the leader of the gang, looked at him with squint eyes and a grumbling expression. He seemed to check out Salvatore's strength. They were three and he was alone beside that sissy on the floor, but Salvatore seemed a bit fishy to him. He had still his hands in his pockets. What was he hiding there? Tom decided to make a retreat, but not without leaving a soundbite which should demonstrate his dominance. Come on, people. Let's leave these two sissies alone so they can suck each other's dick. Joe, you faggots, said the other two, and then they all left the scene. They surely would find themselves soon the next defenseless victim without a superhero interfering. Tom was certain of it. Salvatore gave the man on the floor a hand and said to him, "Let's help you up," and then he asked, "Did you get hurt?" The man on the floor didn't answer. He continued to look stolid to the floor. Salvatore started to ask himself what the matter with that guy was. "Are you all right?" asked Salvatore him and laid carefully his hand on his shoulder. The man twitched and said, 978-3837-075373. Salvatore didn't understand what he was meaning and asked him again, "Are you doing well?" But the man answered him with the same number and added two more. "I am sorry, but I don't understand what you were trying to tell me. What is your name?" Again the man hesitated with his answer and said then faint, "ISBN. That are the ISBN numbers of your books." Salvatore got perplexed and firstly didn't understand what he was talking about, but suddenly he understood. He took his backpack from his shoulders, opened it, and grabbed one of the books and looked for one of the numbers. At the backside on the bottom. "That is number 978-3837-075373 said Victor laconic. And indeed, Salvatore didn't believe his eyes. Then he fetched another book. "For 32-567-9873 said Victor without any emotions. "How do you do that?" "By the way, my name is Salvatore," said Salvatore and reached him his hand. The man grabbed it and Salvatore pulled him up. A lightweight, thought he to himself. Then the man said, "Victor, my name is Victor. I can memorize very well numbers. Previously at the library I..." "Exactly." Now Salvatore remembered where he had seen his face previously at the library. He had been the guy who had scanned his books to enter his lending in the system. He just was one of these guys with which you deal several times and still you don't notice them as they are so unimpressive. Victor was just one of these persons, and above all he was dressed very unsophisticatedly boring, what underlined the unimposing and feeblish impression he made on others. It seemed like he didn't want to be noticed. "Well then, Victor, where do you live?" Victor stated him his address, whereby he began with the house number. It seemed to Salvatore that Victor really liked the numbers. "Okay, is it fine by you if I accompany you to your home?" Salvatore wanted to make him with that offer a favor and take away his fear, which he admitted clearly and which felt irritating even to him. Salvatore knew well the quarter, and so he knew where to go. And so they went a few blocks. Salvatore in the ahead like a bodyguard and Victor to his left a few steps behind him. When they reached Victor's home, Salvatore saw in front of him a very ugly building whose window's front was blotched with yellow shutters which didn't want to fit to the rest of the buildings in the street. But nevertheless that was the apartment building where Victor lived. "Well then, it was a pleasure to help you. I also live in this quarter, maybe our paths will cross again," said Salvatore friendly and reached Victor his hand to say goodbye. Victor hesitated. Again he turned his eyes to the floor and mumbled, "Can't you stay? I'm so alone." Salvatore was surprised. He hesitated a moment. Was the juvenile at the end lying right with his vulgar comment? Was Victor homosexual? But he decided to take a chance and said, "Well then, but do you intend to remain here on the street?" Salvatore's answer conjured a faint-hearted smile on Victor's face, and for the first time he looked Salvatore in the eyes. It were sad eyes that looked at him that he could see clearly in spite of Victor's glasses. He had the impression that Victor suffered much more from being lonely, unlike himself. "Come, friend," said Victor and dig up a bunch of keys out of his jacket pocket. Then he opened the entry door and they went to the entry hall to the elevator which took them to the 4th floor. Victor went ahead when he stepped out of the elevator. A long narrow corridor was visible. To the left and right a lot of doors lead to apartments. Approximately 9 guessed Salvatore. At the very end of the corridor, Victor opened to his left the door to his apartment. To Salvatore's surprise, it hadn't been locked. They entered a small single-room apartment. The view to the living room told Salvatore instantly that Victor had to be a very neat person. He also noticed that the whole furniture was black. Victor sat on the bed and pointed to the only chair in the room, which was situated beside a table which had to be at the same time a working and dining table. Salvatore sat down and said then, "Okay? What now?" Victor remained silent. Salvatore looked around in search for conversation topics. Something he could pick up and talk about it. Then his eyes stroked a few books about Sudoku number riddles and various black folders which were labeled with P01, P02, etc. Finally, he had found something he could talk about and asked Victor, "What do these folders contain which you have labeled with P01, etc.? These are projects." "Projects?" asked Salvatore, perplexed. He couldn't imagine in what kind of projects Victor could be involved. "Yes, program projects." "You mean programming projects?" "Yes, exactly, programming. I do a lot of programming." And his face brightened. "What are these programs for?" Victor hesitated. I can't explain it," said he, and his face showed a sad expression as if he was making himself a reproach therefore. Salvatore decided to change the subject. He let wander his eyes over the table and discovered a clear plastic folder. Sheer out of pure curiosity, he grabbed it and was able to read the following. Patient, Victor Malazzano, age 21, diagnosis, Asperger syndrome, diagnosis details, 1. Social impairment, lacking of understanding of social signals, social/emotional inadequate behavior. 2. Limited interests, aptitude to repetitive routine work. 3. Nonverbal communication difficulties, limited eye contact, gesticulation and mimic, inappropriate expression forms, idiosyncratic rigid look. 4. Talents, numerically highly all-talented. Victor had averted his gaze. He was staring rigidly towards the floor and his eyes filled with tears. Then he said, "That's me." "Yes, this I have understood, but what does it mean?" "They can't do anything about it. It was always like that even as a boy," and suddenly the tears broke out of him. He buried his face in the bedspread and cried bitterly. His crying was underlined with a whimpering. Salvatore understood that he had gone too far with his questions. He put the patient file aside, stood up and put his hand on Victor's shoulder. Then he said with a calming voice, "I am sorry, I shouldn't have." Victor raised his head, the tears were welling from his eyes, and then he said suddenly, "Can you make me dead?" Salvatore backed off and looked at him with a serious face. "Can you help me to make me dead?" repeated Victor his disconcerting question. "Why do you want to die?" asked Salvatore him. "Because I am different. So different than the others. But that doesn't make you a bad person. It is so difficult to be different. Humans are so complicated," said Victor, buried his face again into the blanket and started to cry again. Salvatore thought for a moment about his own situation, his origins and his life, and confirmed then, yes, it is difficult to be different. Not to be normal. Not to be part of the big mass, but give it a thought. From this so-called being different, sometimes extraordinary people have arisen, and from their unique achievements also the huge mass of normal people have profited, even if they often can't see it or don't want to see it. That is also the way Jesus went. The stony way of being different. The way that also many philosophers and scientists went. Nietzsche, from Tesla or Alexander Fleming, the list is long, but nevertheless the ones who were different had still to suffer on their path. The ones that are ostracized, scorned, overlooked, undesired, ragged, and outcasted are alone in their misery. Sometimes they are being accompanied by a loving person. That helps a lot, but mostly they are alone, without love. That is the bitterest state a person can live in. "I understand you. Does that mean that you will help me?" asked Victor, hopeful. "Yes, I will help you." Victor stood up and went to his wardrobe. In one of the top trays he dug through the clothes and pulled out a small box. Devoutly he held it into his hand and reached it over to Salvatore. Then he looked at him with a look that said, "Open it." Salvatore took the box, opened it, and saw to his amazement an old pistol which had to be an heirloom. Then he looked straight into Victor's eyes and asked him, "Do you really want to die?" Victor hesitated a moment and said then, "Yes," and then he confirmed his statement again, giving a more believable impression. "Yes, I want it." Salvatore waited a moment with his answer and said then simply, "Well then." Victor closed his eyes. On his face was an expression of deep contentment. He was ready to receive the coup de grace, ready to leave this cruel world. "But I also want something from you." Salvatore interrupted with these words Victor's thoughts. Disappointed, he opened his eyes and asked, "What? I don't want that your death was in vain. You can bequeath the folders with your programming projects to me." Victor was a little bit surprised, but if that would bring him nearer to his goal, why not? Therefore he pointed with his arm into the direction of the bookshelf where the folders were situated, signalizing him, "Take them." Salvatore went to the bookshelf and asked, "Which ones are the three best ones?" Victor answered promptly, P01, P06, and P27. Salvatore hadn't expected something else from him. "Do you have a shopping bag or something in that kind?" Victor opened his wardrobe and grabbed a traveling bag from the bottom of the wardrobe. Then he handed the bag to Salvatore. Salvatore stored the three folders in the bag, then he said to Victor, "Well, in order that everything goes round, I first will shoot at you, then I will put the gun in your hand and shoot at the floor. So you will get traces of powder on your hands and the police will think that you first did a test shot and then shot yourself. Then I have to leave quickly. In order that it seems even more credible, I will lock the door from outside, therefore I need a replacement key." Victor's face brightened up again. The realistic and methodical manner his new friend treated the whole matter pleased him. He went over to the table, opened a drawer, and dug up a key which he handed over to Salvatore. Salvatore putted it into his right jacket pocket and said then, "Well, you can sit on the bed." Victor started to feel uneasy. Now the moment was here. He now had only a few moments left, but he preferred it that way than living his live the way further the way he had done until now. The room got quiet, very quiet. Victor closed his eyes. First he was able to hear Salvatore rustle, which took quite a while, but surely every second someone was waiting of his imminent death would seem like an eternity. Then he heard how Salvatore did a few steps, and then he heard something tinkle. It sounded like the tinkle of keys. Then he heard how the door of the refrigerator got opened and closed again. Victor lost his patience and opened his eyes. Frightened, he saw how Salvatore had went away from him and was standing by the entrance door. Irritated, he asked him, "But from there you can't help me." "Sure I can. I will help you in my way. I will enclose you here for 3 days. During that time you have the opportunity to think over your death wish. If you really want to die after that 3 days, I will help you with it. But the few food you had I will take with me. So you will get to now in that 3 days the pre-stage to death, namely hunger." "But..." Salvatore turned around without saying a word, went through the door and closed it. Victor stood abruptly up. He wanted to lag behind Salvatore, so he went to his jacket to get his keys, but horrified he realized that his keys weren't in his jacket. So he went over to his bed and laid down in resignation, and a deep apathy took hold of him. Chapter 9, The Photographer and the Beast. The danger which lies within success is the arrogance to believe that if you succeeded in the past, you will also succeed in the future. See William Pollard. The manhunt announcement that La Goina had placed regarding Giovanni Gabriel's kidnapper hadn't been successful until now. The image was too blurred and the wanted criminal seemed to have a very common face. Nothing else remained than waiting. Salvatore decided 2 days later to buy a sweet. He expected that this would bring him a little advantage in the coming court hearing, as he was well aware of the effect that clothes had on a person's opinion regarding another person. As a kid, the others often laughed at him because of his poor clothing. As his parents hadn't had enough money, they often bought him used clothes. He entered a boutique, one that had a good reputation and belonged to the better ones, looked at the outlay and wandered undecided a little bit around. The prices were breathtaking and mixed feelings creep up on him in such a noble atmosphere. It was a kind of anxiety which the premises and the suspense lying in the air caused him. If you were raised poor like him and if your parents taught you to be frugal, then you had the compulsion to feel unease in such premises. Only if you had inside you the tendency to go against your roots with all your strength in order to surpass them and to obtain a higher social status, which insignia of belonging usually were expensive luxury goods and clothing, you still would feel well in similar shops. He knew such people, but personally the thing he most enjoyed was the situation when he found test results of products in consumer magazines which consistently proved that the most expensive articles often were of a worse quality than the cheaper ones. These test results often seemed to him like a kind of allegory for the situation in the society. More appearance than reality. That was the motto of a lot of people, whereby they forgot about the pathetic aspect of this attitude. They forgot how evanescent appearances were. They forgot how many potential got wasted because to be was esteemed so low and often got forgotten. When he finally found in the back part of the boutique a salesperson, this he supposed, as she actually was moving some pullovers to the right place, he approached her and asked her, "I would like to buy a suite, can you assist me with that?" "Sjen." She turned her head to him and looked at him in a smug manner. She lacked of any kind of emotions. Then she said with a sharp tone, "What are your measures?" He simply didn't know them. Well, I see you don't do this often," said she, and examined him with disapproval, turned abruptly her back to him and went away. With every fiber of her body she seemed wanting to tell him her contempt, to show him that he wasn't welcome here, that he didn't fit in this place. After a good while she came back with a tailor measuring tape and ordered in a cold tone, "Turn around." Salvatore imagined that the concentration camp guards must have talked like that to the prisoners, but still he did as he was commanded to. She applied the measuring tape but touched him barely. So tremendous was her repulsion against this disturbing subject, which had gotten lost in her reign of beauty and which even wasn't aware of his non-belonging to this place. "Trousers size 50, jacket size 52. She said only these words, nothing more. Salvatore still had his back towards her, and when he turned around, she already had left in direction of a real customer, a lady which was standing with a portfolio under her arm at the entrance and obviously freed her from his presence. It didn't take him much time, and he had found with her indications of fitting suit combination, whereby he had, as usual, more difficulties with the trousers. He went to the cash desk. There the saleswoman let him wait a long time. So he harumphed several times until she decided to serve him, whereby she didn't even look at him when she handed him out the change. Meanwhile it was 19h when Mrs. Silenzia left the noble boutique, in which she just had bought a new blouse, and went to her car. As usually she was dressed very exquisitely and appealing. On her way to her vehicle she felt the looks of the men passing beside her. She liked the feeling she got from their looks and loved to react with a distant indifference and a look that signified, "Don't bother yourself, you won't get me, as to get me you need to offer my something really special as I am." It gave her pleasure to refuse other people herself and her attention. But when it came to deal with powerful people she got weak. She looked up to them as she also wanted to make a career, get important, powerful, and rich, and luckily she needed therefore only to do an important step today. She didn't see herself doing her actual job for a lifetime, as she knew that she was destined to do something of more importance. Therefore it wasn't useful to lose her time with unimportant things and people. Select and filter, and that on a high level. That was Mrs. Silenzia's maxim. And most decisive was how you sold yourself and how you were perceived by the others. She knew since her childhood that the so-called radiance was nothing less than the effect you caused on others by your appearance. There was no aura that was emitted or other esoteric and magical effects, nothing only but a cool calculation with the emotions of others. Then how you had to influence others that she knew very well since birth. But her problem was that she hadn't been born rich, something she often felt as one of the biggest injustices of the world, and therefore she wanted to change that today. So her thoughts were circulating around the coming event which would change her future for good. Only that counted to her today. She arrived at her car and got in. Then she laid the portfolio she was wearing on the seat next to her and patted it with her hand. Finally she was sitting in her car. How she had hated to go by bus for the past few days. She hated the public transportation per se, as she saw it as a breeding place for all kind of contagious diseases that was populated by a filthy mob. To hell with the stupid babble of these environmentalists, they surely lead the people to believe that they actually really cared about the environment, but surely they were the worst when nobody saw them. It had been a shame that she had to give her car in repair. At first she had tried to put the car mechanic under pressure so that he would repair her car on the same day, then she had tried to seduce him. But both things didn't bring the desired effect. The stubborn buck had remained persistent and had insisted that he needed more time to remove the bumps on the front part of the car. Well then, at least he didn't make any annoying questions or crude remarks. These craftsmen could be so vulgar. Surely he dreamed about getting his unwashed fingers on her impeccable body, possibly he masturbated that same evening while thinking about it. Well, it will remain a dream, she thought, and laughed maliciously while having simultaneously a touch of slight disgust in her face. Then she pressed her foot on the gas pedal. After a 30 minutes drive Mrs. Silenzia arrived at her home. When she opened the door to her apartment building, another tenant entered after her and remained at the wall with the letterboxes. She didn't know him, like she didn't know anybody in this building, therefore she got quick into the lift, and one more time she didn't find quick enough the button to close the doors, so she quickly pressed the number of her floor. It had been sufficient time for the stranger to reach the lift and hinder the doors from closing with his hand. She would have loved to hit him with the stock on his hand, but she only turned her eyes when he entered the lift with a timid smile. So they would have to share the same lift. Also, that was something intolerable that had to change soon in her life. Unbearable to have to live in this building with all these apartments. Constantly new lodgers and people around her, and what she hated most was exactly this situation that she had to share the lift with a stranger. 2 levels later she thought, finally he gets off. And 1 floor later she also went off the lift and to the left towards her apartment. She pulled out her keys from her bag and opened the door to her formidably situated but slightly overpriced apartment. Suddenly someone pushed her hefty from behind into her apartment. She stumbled in her high heels over the carpet in front of her and felt abundantly clumsy on the floor. When she turned over her view to her radar, she horrified looked at the face of the same foreigner had been just a moment before with her in the lift. "What do you want? Are you crazy?" "By pushing me that way from behind," said she in a very sharp tone despite of the initial scare. The man said nothing. Instead he closed the door behind him, got a picture out of his jacket pocket and showed it to her. But from that distance she wasn't able to recognize anything, only that it had to be a night shot. Suddenly she had the thought that he probably even wasn't a tenant but instead a criminal which had gained access to the building and now wanted to abuse her. So she got nervous, something that rather happened very seldom. With an unsecure but still determined voice she said, "What do you want from me? I haven't done you anything." "I want that you confess you're guilty," said Salvatore calm. "Confess my guilty? But I am not aware to be guilty of anything." She got cautious. With such crazy guys you have to be careful, thought she. Don't provoke him by saying anything wrong. "Not guilty?" asked Salvatore with an unmistakable sound of cynicism in his voice. "Yes. I don't know what you were talking about." "Well then have a look at his picture. Come closer to me." Slowly she stood up and thought thereby that this was a trap. As soon as she would approach him he would grab her and hold shut her mouth and then rape and eventually kill her. She didn't stand a chance. Therefore she started to scream. She screamed loud for help and run away from the scaring stranger, and she really hoped to be able to evade him for the time until someone would come for help. Whoever that would be. Salvatore putted back immediately the picture in his pocket and ran behind her. He was able to quickly catch up with her in her high heels and grabbed her from behind. With his right arm he squeezed her throat, and with his left hand he grappled her right wrist and bent her arm behind her back. She tried to free herself with her right hand from his stranglehold by drilling her fingernails into his arm. With the result that Salvatore started to bleed slightly, therefore he forced her arm even more backwards and squeezed her rougher. Now she started to gasp and removed her nails from his arm. Subsequently he stopped to squeeze her but still kept her arm bent backwards. With his now free right hand he took out again the photograph and rubbed it under her nose. Her pupils dilated instantly, thus far that you could have said that her eye color wasn't gray but black instead. Like a deluge it came over her and she realized the real reason of this unwanted guest's visit: blackmailing. This jerk wanted to blackmail her, but what exactly wanted he to extort from her? Money, or eventually even sexual favors, and these possibly of a perverted nature. Yes, that was it, he was a pervert. You just had to look at him, then you could see it very obvious. He was an abnormal person. On these thoughts she got disgusted. In that moment she preferably would have liked to shake off his cold grasp and wash herself. But suddenly she got upset. Why did he have to meddle himself into other people's affairs? Salvatore released her and asked her, "Do you remember it? As it is such long time ago. It can be that you forgot about it, can't it?" He pronounced his words deliberately with a portion of cynicism. "Get to the point. What do you want?" asked she, clearly irritated. "What I want?" Salvatore waited a moment. "My good, your cold-bloodedness shudders me. I would have expected something different than this question in such a tone as a first reaction, considering what you did. Have again a look at it." He took again the picture and held it in front of her face. On the picture you could see a car. It was her car, that she realized by looking at the plate, which bumped a cyclist during the nightfall. Instantly she tried to grab the picture with the intention of tearing it to pieces and preferably to burn it, but Salvatore managed to pull back his hand in time. "My good," the guy drove straight without giving a hand sign. "I thought that he was about to turn right, like I was," flared she up. "Is that a reason to overrun him and leave him behind lying on the roadside, apparently from the fact that you obviously don't have a clue about traffic rules? What do you want from me, and where did you get that picture from?" asked she again, galled. It went against his principles to explain to her that he was a freelance photographer, which naturally always was carrying a camera with him anytime, ready to make a snapshot also on that evening. Therefore, he simply said to her, "That doesn't matter. What matters is what you are thinking to do in this case." The last part of his sentence irritated her. Now she was sure he wanted to blackmail her or even abuse her. She hadn't deluded herself. Now she had to gain time. What did he want to hear? That she had to tell him. What did he want from her? That she had to find out, as it was a matter of life and death. Her life. Carefully she asked, "Do you want money?" "No, for goodness sake, I don't want any hush money." She instantly noticed that he wanted to hear an ethically correct answer. "Well," started she very carefully, "I will go to the police and confess." "And what else?" "Well, what else shall I do?" she said, and fell back in an aggressive tone of voice. Her facade hadn't held long. "I would have expected that you also wanted to apologize with the victim, and that you ask me how he is going and if I know where he lives and where he is right now. That's what I expected else, but as I see, the person you hit doesn't play an important role in your thinking." No, it isn't like that," hurried she to appease him. "Of course I was assuming all that. It is self-evident that I wanted to do all this too. Tell me his address, I will write it down." Salvatore turned around the picture, and she was able to recognize that he had typewritten the address of the hospital where the victim of her hit and run was laying. Cautious, she stretched her hand and took slowly the picture. Then she read the name and address and said, "I am so terribly sorry," and started to cry intensely. While she turned her face towards the floor, the tears were rolling over her cheeks. Salvatore grabbed tight her shoulders. She got stiff, and then he grabbed her chin and raised her head ungently. He now was looking directly into her eyes. They were watery and her mouth corners were skewed downwards. He loosened his grasp, went to the door, and didn't turn around anymore, but instead left her apartment silently as he had come. She remained a while in that position, then she started again to cry and pressed the picture against her face. "Why? Why good? Why? Why do you do that to me?" she craved. But suddenly she tore apart the picture full of despite and threw the snippets on the floor. "You asshole! You will see what I am capable of." Her consternation only had been faked, and that with success. The asshole had left her in peace and even left her the picture. She went to the phone and wanted to call the police and serve them a story how she had been harassed and nearly raped or something of the kind. In any case, she had to act quickly, as offense is the best defense. But wait a moment. Maybe he has a copy of the picture. She sat down bugged and turned on the television to distract her a little bit from that wicked situation. The local news were running, and they were talking about a kidnapping and showing at the moment a composite sketch and a slight blurry picture of a surveillance camera. When she took a closer look at it, she recognized the guy from before. She was absolutely certain of it. Now she was perplexed and looked mesmerized on the screen while she turned up the volume. They were talking about a kidnapping of the industrial magnate Giovanni Gabriele and a suspect, which composite sketch they were showing. Her mood cleared up immediately. It seemed that fate was on her side again. The guy from before was a wanted criminal. The police surely would accord her more credibility than him, and if she snitched on him first and they caught him and he really was responsible for the kidnapping, then her small hit and run story wouldn't play such an important role anymore. It simply would go under in the big kidnapping story. Eventually she even could stick that hit and run story on him. For that she only had to come up with a fitting explanation. She had already something in mind, something of the kind that he was on the run that said day and that he had forced her to drive him around in her car. While doing so, unfortunately, that accident happened. But he forced her to drive further, although she wanted to help the victim. And the picture? About the details she could think while the police was on her way to her. Now it was absolutely important to report her story immediately to the police, therefore she grabbed her phone and dialed the number of the police hotline. Sgen. Her call was transferred from the police telephone station to Commissioner Lagina. He wrote down her address and hit immediately the road with Sergio. When they arrived, they rang the bell at the entrance of the block of flats where Mrs. Salenzia lived. It took a while until she opened the main entry door. Something that bothered Lagina noticeable, as patience was not his strength. When they arrived at Mrs. Salenzia's apartment door, Lagina immediately noticed the envelope that was stuck on it. He just had the time to tear it off before the door got opened with a ruck. Mr. Salenzia suddenly was standing under the doorframe. Not bad, thought Lagina, and reached the envelope backwards to Sergio. Please come in, said she with tears in her eyes. The need for protection that she emitted even made her more attractive in Lagina's eyes. His pants already started to stretch. The poor woman had surely gone through a lot, he thought. Well then, let's start from the beginning. Please tell us what happened, he asked her gently. One moment please, I will get you two a coffee. She excused herself and left the room. Lagina used the occasion to signalize Sergio with a telling grin that he found her hot. Shortly thereafter she returned with a dinner tray and 3 cups of coffee on it and put it on the saloon table. Well, it was like that, started she her invented story while Lagoan listened to her attentively while turning his attention from time to time to her body charms, something that didn't remain hidden to her attention, while Sergio for his part remained in the background. But after a while Sergio interrupted her in the middle of her narration. Boss, I think you should have a look at this. Not now, Sergi, stifled Lagoan him angrily. But boss, she. Not now, repeated Lagina now remarkably louder and turned his head towards Sergio giving him a dirty look. Boss, she is lying, returned Sergio firmly, have a look at this. The room was caught immediately in silence. Mrs. Silenzia gulped, then Sergio reached over to Lagina the content of the envelope they had found stuck to her apartment door. Lagina saw a picture which obviously had been taken at night. On it was clearly a car that hit a bicycle nearby a light post while turning right. A further picture showed the car zoomed nearer and it was slightly overexposed. It seemed like taken with a night vision camera, and on it the driver was clearly recognizable. It was Mrs. Silenzia. The third thing that was included in the envelope was a short note to the police. To the police. The picture was taken the 4th June. On the picture you can see Mrs. Claudia Silenzia in her vehicle while she is running over the cyclist Carlo Battani, which is now lying badly injured in the hospital Santa de la Cura. Silenzia was speechless and Lagina also. Chapter 10. And as I was wandering on a small path. Come through this tight gate. As the gates are wide and the path too, which leads to damnation, and there are many which choose that path. And the gate is tight and the path too, which leads to the life, and there are few that find it. New Testament, Matthew. 3 days had passed. At the door of Victor Malazzano a rustle was audible, then a key got pushed into the lock and suddenly the door opened. Salvatore entered, while Victor remained lying on the bed. He was in a kind of delirium as he hadn't been barely eating and drinking for the past few days. Salvatore immediately understood how severe the situation was and brought Victor a glass of water on which he let sip him slowly. After a while he said in good mood to him, good news for you. The 2 software companies to whom I send your programming projects have immediately shown their interest in a collaboration with you, Sjen. But how did you? Asked Victor with a shaky voice. Well, it was easier than thought. First of all, I scanned all the papers you had in your folders, then I send them together with a short portrait of yours to these companies asking them if they were interested. Luckily, you had put enough information about yourself in the imprint of your projects. That was enough for a mini-curriculum. Well, right now that means that it is about time that you brace yourself up so we can get you ready for the coming job interviews. But I can't. Yes, Victor? You can. I will help you with it, and from a certain point on forwards you will have to do the rest, okay? The next day Salvatore remained in Victor's apartment. They exercised having a simple form of job interview. Victor had to present himself briefly and answer questions regarding his programs. With the time passing, even a slight smile appeared on Victor's face. Salvatore only left the apartment twice to buy some grocery and a ready-made suit. At the library, Victor's actual employer, Salvatore, had informed them already after their first encounter that Victor was lying sick in bed with an angina. After 3 days the day had arrived when Victor had to conduct his first job interview. He started to get nervous and commenced to scratch his head and to teeter persistently with his right leg. Salvatore didn't insist that Victor should stop doing these things, as he didn't want to make him even more nervous by giving him too much tips and dictate him more behavioral rules than absolute necessary. A short time thereafter they were both sitting in the conference room of a prestigious software company. The chairs were made of leather and the floors out of marble. All elements were kept in bright colors, and the receptionist, which had accompanied them to the room, looked like a model. Mrs. Ilaria Baccanello, head of the human resources, was on her way to them, dressed in an anthracite-colored dress made out of a silk and wool mixture. The skirt accentuated her wasp waist and still gave her a rather elegant than provoking appearance. She was eager to make the acquaintance of that supposed genius which suddenly had appeared out of the nowhere. Such cases always raised her suspicion, and she didn't keep that to herself. The reason behind her doubt was a subliminal envy which she felt against natural talents. As for herself, she had worked hard for everything to get where she was now. Her external appearance hadn't been always so appealing. During her teenager years, she had to bother with a slight overweight and she had to wear ugly glasses. But she had surpassed all that with a will of iron and contact lenses, and the ugly duckling had become a beautiful swan which had left his past entirely behind it. New friends, a new place to live, a new look, everything new, and all of that well considered, arranged so that the present could not get mixed up with the past. With the exception that she was good in memorizing and reproducing information, she had no special talents. Why she had decided to go for a career in human resources? Officially, because she liked to work with people. Unofficially, because she had looked for a position where men with their pathetic professional claim of power would not interfere with her own career plans, and she could reach herself quickly a powerful position which she had successfully managed. But the last year, a new department chief in the IT joined the company and exhausted his right to have a say when it came to hire new employees. Therewith he concurred her at one of her core competencies. He also had been the one whose attention had been caught by the job application of that supposed genius which they were about to interview today. Unfortunately, she only had been absent 1 week, and that was the surprise that awaited her at her return. She, on the contrary, never would have invited that freak because already alone due to the poor quality of his application documents. In her opinion, a candidate not only needed to have a smart brain but also bring a certain professional presence along. So she reached, lost in her thoughts, the conference room in which the applicant was already waiting together with a companion. The receptionist had told her in advance that the applicant had brought with him a companion, a kind of a personal advisor, what she personally considered as very unusual. When she entered the room, the expected freak was sitting there, lanky and clothed in an unfitting suit, with a quite remarkable companion at his side, which immediately stood up and reached out to welcome her. She welcomed him, but when she wanted to salute the freak, this one jerked back, which irritated her, but finally also the freaky guy saluted her very reserved, without giving her his hand nor looking in her eyes. She found him terrible. During the following 20 minutes a rather dull conversation took place. At a certain point she even didn't know anymore whether what to say nor what to ask, as the candidate answered every question very haltingly. She was able to come up with a certain amount of comprehension for Victor Malazzano's condition, but it wasn't a lot. She didn't like him, as already a simple communication with him didn't follow the normal rules, something that she personally disliked a lot, and therefore she would not propose to his superior to hire him. And so Mrs. Baccanello ended after 20 minutes abruptly the conversation and said goodbye while she pretended to remain friendly. Briefly she informed the two that soon the department manager would come to continue the conversation on a technical functional level with them. Mario Ferro, the department manager, a calm guy in his mid-30s, came 10 minutes later. He entered into the meeting room and found to his surprise only Victor and Salvatore in it. But on the other side he wasn't really surprised. Mrs. Baccanello used to show her sympathy or antipathy for the candidates in a very frank way, something that also hadn't slipped to Salvatore's perception. So Salvatore was very relieved when he looked in the friendly face of Mr. Ferro while he shook his hand. It appeared that the department manager could be called an open-minded person. He was just the opposite to Mrs. Baccanello. Mr. Ferro first talked deliberately about the company and himself, whereby he didn't conceal that one of his kids had the Down syndrome. Salvatore had the impression that Mr. Ferro eventually had to go also through a lot in his childhood and had been an often teased outsider, which now surely sensitized him for Victor's situation. They also talked about the unusual delta-flying hobby of Mr. Ferro, and the interview seemed not to involve any technical aspects of the job. But at a certain point Mr. Ferro then consequently switched over to the technical aspects of the job and suddenly fetched some aptitude tests out of his briefcase, which consisted in mathematical and logic questions, and asked Victor to fill them out. As Victor finished to answer the questions in a very short time, Mr. Ferro had a very surprised look at his watch. And when he realized that Victor had answered all the questions without any mistake, he was even more astonished, almost speechless. Then he presented to Victor the duties of the job in detail. Salvatore wasn't any more able to understand the technical content of their discussion, and he was positively surprised about Victor's sudden communicativeness. It seemed to Salvatore that Victor clearly understood the content of the conversation. And after further 40 minutes Mr. Ferro said, "Well, then everything is clear, and I think that we now have talked enough." "Mr. Malazzano, or can I call you simply Victor?" asked Mr. Ferro jovially. Victor answered with a short, "Yes, of course." "Well then, Victor, from my point of view, you can start right now to work for us. By the way, my name is Mario. I see that you are absolutely suited for the job. Regarding the cancellation period at your actual employer, I will contact him, and if it is absolutely inevitable, I will pay him a compensation for your instant leave so that you can start immediately to work for us." Salvatore was all smiles. He grabbed Victor's left shoulder and gave him a friendly smack, and Mr. Farrow chuckled while Victor was surprisingly showing off a smile on his lips. "If it turns out to be inconvenient for you to come every day to the office, it doesn't matter what your reasons are, as I can imagine that your condition sometimes makes it difficult for you to interact with other people. You just can work from your home office. The VPN connection to our network is excellent and is being used daily also by other employees." Claudia Silenzia had gone through hell for the last few days. She had spent 2 days in investigative custody. Her lawyer finally had managed to bail her out, but it had cost her almost all of her savings. At the same time, something else was bothering her, as she had to return the folder with the papers with the budget figures for the next 3 years, which she had taken away from her employer. That damned evening she got arrested. Her original intention was to scan these documents and hand them over to a potential new employer under the condition to get a job on the upper level of the hierarchy, and then everything fell apart, and this only because of that crazy asshole that had spied on her with his camera. Right now she had no other choice than putting the papers straight away back at their place, hoping that no one noticed that she took them. That's why she was walking at such late hour through the streets, as her car had been confiscated by the police to start their investigation about the hit and run she allegedly had committed. Suddenly she heard how a crossbike approached. My God, how she hated these crossbikes because they were so noisy. As she turned her head left while the crossbike passed her, she couldn't believe her eyes. Wasn't that crazy asshole? The driver had leased the same jacket on as the guy who had bothered her in her apartment. She started to panic, but suddenly she realized that this moment could also be a chance to get her revenge. He had stopped at the traffic light and didn't notice her. Now he took off again. She started to run. Ahead there was another traffic light. There he would have to stop again. He stopped and Silenzia approached him from behind. The last few steps she slowed down so that she could sneak up on him. Suddenly she grabbed the shoulder of the crossbike driver and pulled it. He turned around and they looked each other in the eyes. It was the guy which had harassed her in her apartment. "You bastard," shouted she, and wanted to bury her fingernails in his eyes, but Salvatore gave her quick-witted a kick into her stomach and she fell backwards, hitting one of the parked cars behind her. Then he accelerated his crossbike, and by the moment she was up on her feet again, it was already too late to recognize the license plate number, but she had memorized the brand and the model. Immediately she took her mobile and called the police hotline. She didn't want to mention her name and started to talk without interruption. "I have seen him, the guy that is wanted by the police. He is on a crossbike." "Who did you see?" answered the policewoman calm on the other side of the line. "Well, that criminal which is being wanted by the police in relation to the kidnapping of businessman Gabriel. He is on a Honda CR 125 crossbike on the Via dei Coronari Street, heading towards the Sant'Angelo Bridge," said she hasty, and then she hung up. The police officer forwarded the message immediately to the traffic police and noted additional to the caller was Claudia Silenzia. The software had spilled out the name of the caller on her monitor. Silenzia didn't know, as so many, that no one remained anonymous to the police if they called them via their house telephone or their mobile, as there was a software in the background active which indicated them. Disregarding of the configuration the caller had on his telephone, always the number and the registered person to the number. On public phones they saw the address of the phone booth. The traffic police got the message, and it didn't take long until they spotted the crossbike and they started to pursue it. Salvatore noticed on his rear mirror that a police car was pursuing him. He started to accelerate and slipped away between the cars on the street. In that moment the police car turned on his blue lights and continued the chase. One of the police officers even started to shout behind him using the megaphone, "Police! Stop immediately your vehicle. I repeat, stop immediately." But that didn't stop Salvatore from accelerating his crossbike even more. The police speeded after him. He entered a street that was plastered. A traffic sign indicated that cars were not allowed on that street. The street winded up the hill to a cathedral. Luckily that evening the street was almost empty. "Now we got him," said one of the policemen with a grinning on his face. He went up towards a blind end. Salvatore noticed the same thing in that moment. He had arrived at the place where the cathedral was situated. The cathedral was being restored, and therefore a few scaffoldings were lined around its edges. Salvatore started to check out the place, but there was no way out in sight. Should he drive back, accelerate, and try to get away by driving over the police cars? Too risky. Then he saw a few juveniles which were at the balustrade, and as they heard the police sirens they vanished in all directions. A side of the place led towards the river which winded itself through the city. It was a popular viewpoint, like a huge balcony from which the people could look at the river and the lovely promenade across. Salvatore approached the place. Also there were a few scaffoldings. The police arrived and the policemen stopped their car at sight distance, then they got off it and placed themselves behind the car. While one of the policemen started to walk slowly towards Salvatore with his firearm raised and a flashlight in the other hand pointing at him. Through the megaphone another one demanded in a harsh tone, "Step off your cross bike and surrender immediately. You were arrested." But Salvatore didn't have an ear for his demand. Suddenly he accelerated again, made a U-turn and raised the front wheel of his cross bike. Over a small ramp which served the construction workers to get on the balustrade with their pushcarts full of cement, he drove on the scaffolding. The policemen remained breathless. Had he just now fell to his death? By no means, as from that point on a thick cable led to the opposite front of a building which was used to transport heavy loads to the other side. On the other side was an old monastery which also was being restored. Salvatore drove confident and in a sporty speed over the thick cable towards the front of the monastery of the other side of the river. The scenery had something spooky. As the police arrived at the balustrade they couldn't believe their eyes. He had arrived safe and sound at the other riverside and was just about to drive on the scaffolding there. Then they saw how he drove over a ramp to the street. To place an accurate shot the distance was simply too far and there with related risks also, so they immediately called the other police cars over the radio. They asked their colleagues on the other riverside to start immediately the manhunt for a man with a Honda CR-125 crossbike. The radio call was also heard by Commissioner Lagina, which just had finished his late shift and was about to go home, but he didn't want to miss the chance to catch Gabrielle's kidnapper, so also he followed the call. If he would catch that guy it would give his career finally the long-expected boost. He came on rushing from the Via del Erba street to cut of Salvatore, which very likely was coming from the Via della Conciliation street. And indeed there was a crossbike approaching in a breakneck speed. Lagina was indifferent to the possibility if it really was the guy the police was hunting. He decided to accelerate to cut off the approaching crossbike driver. With about 80 kilometers per hour Lagina turned hard the steering wheel to get the corner. Luckily the street was large enough so that his maneuver succeeded. Salvatore managed barely to evade him. He had to hit the brakes and got into a skid. Because of that he lost control over his crossbike. A bench got in his way and he dashed against it, but instead of falling to the pavement he managed to reject himself just in the right moment, to do a flip in the air and to land on his feet while his crossbike dashed against the bench right behind him. Lagina on his side managed barely to slow down his car and at the same time evade the obstacles that were in his way. The fierce sweat was on his forehead, his pupils were dilated and he was shivering slightly. He rapidly got over the shock and turned abruptly his car. In his rear mirror he had seen in which Salvatore was escaping by foot. In a rage he engaged his pursuit. It bugged him that he had missed him on his attempt to stop him. There he was. Now or never. Lagina accelerated his car. Salvatore noticed the approaching car and continued to run forward on the sidewalk. Suddenly Lagina saw an opportunity to drive his car over to the sidewalk and took it. "Now I got you, you bastard," shouted he angrily. He accelerated again his car. In that moment Salvatore suddenly stopped and turned around towards him. At the first moment Lagina was perplexed, but then he saw it as a chance. He simply would run over the fugitive if there was no other way to stop him. He would think afterwards about a fitting explanation for his misbehavior. At the last moment Salvatore managed to pull back between the parked cars and Lagina missed him by a hair. He looked to his left and saw Salvatore run away, then he shouted furiously, "Shit." And as he looked forward again he realized that it was too late to stop his car and evade the approaching obstacle. So he pushed the brakes to the maximum and drove his car to the right along the wall. Finally the car came to a stop. Nothing had happened to him, but his car was totally scuffed and almost a wreck. Immediately he jumped out of the car and continued his pursuit by foot. Salvatore on the other side, with his body full of adrenaline, was still on the run with only one goal in his mind. He wanted to get so far away as possible. So he saw the car that approached him rapidly too late, namely when he stepped from the sidewalk out to the street. The woman sitting in the car yelled while she hit the brakes and buried her fingers into the wheel. Then everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Instantly, Salvatore managed to fulfill a jump into the air. Once in the air, he did a split. The approaching car, a flat roadster, slid underneath him and came to a stop after a few meters while Salvatore landed on his feet at the same time. For a moment, Lagina had lost his speech while the woman in the roadster continued her hysterical yelling. Then Salvatore continued to run and Lagina followed him, and with every meter they did he found it more and more difficult to keep up with that guy. Then he saw how Salvatore turned to the left into a back alley. When he arrived to the point, he started to grin as he saw a dead-end sign. Now I got that rat, he thought, and started to run into the back alley with his gun in his hand. At the end, the alley did a turn to the left. At the corner, he stopped abruptly and pressed his body to the wall. Then he turned suddenly and pointed with his gun into the alley. At the end of the alley, he spotted a few dumpsters. "Come out, you rat, you are trapped." He waited a moment, but nothing happened. Then he shouted again, "Come out, you damned son of a bitch, or I will come and get you." Then something rattled and rustled at the dumpsters. "Okay, as you wish." Lagina started to walk vigorously towards the dumpsters. Mentally, he was cursing himself as he didn't know his exact location, and right now he would have liked to call for reinforcement. Finally, he arrived at the dumpsters. He ducked down and sneaked at them. Then after a short moment, he kicked one of the dumpsters with the intention to frighten Salvatore and to force him to get out of his hideout. But the only thing he could hear was a rustling. Then everything went quiet again. Lagina now had enough of that hide-and-seek game. He stood up and grabbed with his hand the handle of the dumpster, and with a jolt he pulled up the covering, pointed with his gun into the container, and shouted, "I got you." But to his surprise, the dumpster did not contain Salvatore, but instead a young boy, badly clothed and skinny. The boy stared at him with his eyes wide open, while Lagina realized what must have happened. Salvatore most probably had surmounted the wall at the end of the alley where every normal human being would have failed, and must have gotten away through the adjoining backyards. One more time that guy had gotten away, and a mixture of anger and slight respect came up in Lagina. Back at the police station, a large-scale manhunt got initiated that same night, and Lagina was inquiring the identification code of the confiscated crossbike. The computer spiked out a name and the address of a certain Salvatore. A police unit was immediately on the way. Another policeman interrogated the boy, and he found out that he was part of a juvenile gang that had been brought by a people trafficker into the country, and that they lived since 2 weeks in an abandoned factory wreckage, and that they were ordered to collect as much money as possible with daily pickpocketing and nightly burglary. The goal was to collect in a few weeks as much as possible. Mostly they hid the booty in improvised hideouts in the woods until they returned with it over the green border to Bulgaria, their home country. So they were classical criminal tourists, which these days were mostly responsible for the burglaries in Italy. The boy had split up with his gang and was trying to make it on his own. Lagina arrived together with the police unit at the address of the fugitive driver and the alleged kidnapper of Giovanni Gabriele, the businessman. It was an older house in a village outside the city. He saw immediately that it would get difficult to secure the house and the surrounding, as there were several accesses and the surrounding was rather difficult to overlook. Lagina thought about ordering a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging cameras, but then he decided that the mobile thermal imaging units had to be sufficient for the moment. The police squad started to disengage and to surround the house to make sure that the fugitive could not flee. It is proven that a high percentage of fugitives returns to their regular living place. The reasons, therefore, are various. Mostly it is because of a lack of alternatives, as they can't hide out somewhere else, or a lack of financial resources to keep a low profile for a while. But also the lack of ideas, fear, and short-sighted thinking were reasons to lead a fugitive back to his usual habitat. Also, a large percentage of fugitives hides out at relatives like their parents or siblings. The police was right now checking that also out, but usually this investigations were more time-consuming and complex. There are different ways to raid a house. Basically two, the quiet and the noisy one. Lagina ordered to make use of the moment of surprise and to operate covertly. So the policeman advanced step by step, giving each other cover. 3 of them scurried up to the first floor where the entry door was. Then they positioned themselves at the right and left side of the door, and the third one took the battering ram in his hands, which he was carrying, and rammed the door. Instantly the other 2 raided the house, while the third one followed them. First they came across the kitchen. Then they saw a bedroom where an older couple was lying in the bed. The granny had sit up with her mouth wide open while she was pushing the old man beside her, which still was lying snoring in the bed. He had to be deaf. One of the policemen asked her in a harsh tone, "Where is Salvatore?" Trembling, she pointed downwards. The policeman turned to his colleagues and ordered, "You stay here and search the other rooms, I go down to the others." Now the policemen were standing assembled together at the two doors of the ground floor of the house. Then one of them roared, "Surrender right now and come out with your hands in the air." The house is surrounded. But everything remained quiet. As the doors were massive and made out of metal, they couldn't simply bash them in with the battering ram. One of the policemen made a hand sign. Thereupon two of them went back to the police vehicle and returned with a huge disc grinder. They started it, and with a hell of a noise and spitting out a lot of sparkles, it munched itself through the metal around the door lock. Then the door got opened with a kick. The fugitive was just about to try to escape through a small window in the left corner of the room. One of the policemen shouted, "Stop," and gave a warning shot. In that moment, the man managed to get through the window to the outer side and started to run away immediately. A policeman ran around the house and started the persecution. After 100 meters, he had outran him and threw him to the ground. Finally, said Lagina, relieved when he saw his colleague coming back with the fugitive behind him. Finally, they got that bastard busted. At the police station, Lagina wanted to start immediately with the interrogation, even if he hadn't slept for almost 24 hours, as meanwhile it was about 4:30 in the morning. That's why his colleagues recommended him to get a rest, but it was almost impossible to change his mind about that until he finally gave in into sitting in the observation room next door, behind the mirrored glass, where he could watch how two of his colleagues with a beefy stature started to squeeze dry the suspect like an orange. During 1 hour they gave him hell. They yelled at him, bumped into him by accident, made humiliating remarks, and denied his wish for a glass of water, and also didn't allow him to make a call. Salvatore was near to a mental breakdown when one of the policemen said to him yet again, "Okay, let's start all over. Your name is Salvatore Noranti and you claim to be innocent." Tired and worn out, he answered, "Yes, I am Salvatore Noranti and I am innocent." Salvatore Liberatori rang at the door, even if he knew that it most probably wasn't closed. After a while, Victor Malizzano opened it. Salvatore would have to stay at his place for a while. He thought that that would be safer now that he was hunted by the police. Chapter 11, Fulfillment and Deception. The human being is even more successful in self-deception than in lying. Fyodor M. Dostoevsky. The camera had recorded everything. There was no doubt about it. Someone in his entourage had betrayed him and sold him out. It was someone he had trusted, and now that someone had deceived him bitterly. Maybe he had to blame himself, as he had given away his trust too careless based on the attraction he felt for that person and his vague hope to engage in a sexual relationship. Betrayal was now the price he had to pay for his carelessness. Mr. Rossi, the manager of the marketing company Mopub SRL, put the recording of the surveillance camera into a padded envelope and sat embittered into his Porsche Cayenne on his way to the police to file a charge. The next same day, the handcuffs closed tightly around Claudia Silenzia's wrists. She was dissolved in tears, but whining and moaning and the relentless expressing of her innocence brought her noting. She got transferred to the police station, and there she had to bear an interrogation that went on for hours. It came to light that she had stolen important business documents with the intention to hand them over to a third party with the purpose of getting therefore some kind of reward. Therefore, several criminal acts had been committed, and she looked forward to prison or at least a high penalty, but first of all she would have to spend a while in investigative custody. Salvatore entered the courtroom. At the door, he had been once again received by the unfriendly doorman and hassled with a fastidious body search before he had let him in. Salvatore had changed his appearance since his last attendance at the court by trimming his long black hair back to a crew cut and also dyeing it brown. Additionally, he had grown a chin beard. Now he was eager to know if the police had succeeded in finding any eyewitnesses which might have seen the occurrences and could clarify the question if the dog had been off-leash that said day where his daughter had lost her life, but he didn't put much hope into it. After the usual introduction greeting phrases, the judge called straightforwardly the policeman Balestra into the witness stand. "Well then, Mr. Balestra, how did you advance with your investigations?" Full of pride, he answered, "Well, we succeeded in finding a witness, Your Honor." Salvatore raised his head, likewise did the counterparty. Even the judge got stiff in his chair. They were all visibly surprised, as no one of them had really counted on it. "Dear Judge, it has been possible for us to fulfill your assignment. After intensive investigations, we were able to come across with Mrs. Francesca Zanalla. She was present on site that said day and was able to witness the occurrences. Then he made a brief breathing pause and amended, according to her testimony, the dog was off-leash that day. For a moment Salvatore's breath stagnated. The witch opened wide up her eyes and her lawyer Torzalij harumphed and tried to attract everyone's attention by standing up and saying vigorously, "Your Honor, I demand that the eyewitness enters herself the witness stand to make her testimony. Mr. Balestra has delayed us long enough." Torzalij's crude manners weren't appreciated by Judge Arito, so that he called him to order, even if he knew well that he was a lost case of arrogance, hubris, and a lack of respect for his fellow human beings. Policeman Balestra got nervous about the quarrel, so that he left the witness stand with an insecurely stuttered, "Ah yes, she is here." The judge proclaimed loud and clear, "I call the witness Francesca Zanalla into the witness stand." The law officer opened a small side door and a tiny, unremarkable woman entered the courtroom. All eyes were stuck on her as she went with small steps towards the witness stand. She had red hair, a pale skin, covered with freckles, a small snub nose, rather narrow lips, and green big round eyes. Her clothing was somewhat modest and consisted of light blue jeans and a striped pullover. Torzalij already started to rub his hands, thrilled with anticipation to tear apart her testimony. He already had made a step forward towards the witness stand as the judge called him back and granted Salvatore the first questioning. In a bad mood, Torzalij returned back to Kantaris, which appeased him by caressing his back with her hand like done with a wild animal that had to be appeased. Salvatore on the other side was slightly surprised by the whole situation. He, that normally was secure of himself, didn't know where to start. So he decided to mention again all the terrible events and to ask each time for the point of view of the eyewitness. Even if the going through the terrible event hurt himself a lot, it reassured him to hear that the witness Francesca Zanalla practically made the same declaration as himself and that she confirmed two important points. 1. The dog had been off-leash. 2. His daughter hadn't thrown any stones at the dog. Kantaris was going mad in her corner and she commented every sentence of the witness by head shaking and an upset, "Unbelievable, that's not true." Her hair even seemed to raise. Torzalij on his side was scraping with his feet on the floor as if he was a bull that was about to go wild. The judge had to call them both to order several times. As Torzalij finally got his moment to question the witness, he threw rough his first question at her. "What was your name?" Zarona. A tactic he used to apply to make the witness nervous and insecure. "Zanalla. Francesca Zanalla," answered she with a thin voice. Well, and where do you live?" "I live at the street Via del Tiglio 10. Well, and what do you do for living?" "Do you work?" Suddenly she started to stammer. Salvatore started also to get slightly nervous. What was the matter? "Well, I work in a living group." Well, in a living group. And what role is yours exactly there?" I do handcrafted works." Salvatore decided to object as he couldn't understand what this kind of questions had to do with the case. The judge demanded an explanation from Torzalij, which replied that for the evaluation of the credibility of the witness's testimony it was vital to know in which circumstances she lived. Reluctantly the judge admitted that he was right. Thereafter Kantaris called Torzalij at her desk by giving him a hand signal and showed him something on her mobile. Torzalij's countenance improved radically and rubbing his hands he returned to the witness stand. His face assumed a sadistic expression. Something had been told to him by Kantaris which delighted him at the moment exceptionally strong. He took a posture of superiority in front of Francesca Zanalla and said then, "Tell us, Mrs. Zanalla, this living group in which you work, are you there as an employee or as a patient?" "As it is a living group for mentally disturbed persons, isn't it? Should we call there and ask them?" He had let the cat out of the bag. Torzalij obviously tried to discredit the witness. Kantaris had used her smartphone to check out the living address of Mrs. Zanalla and had found out that she was living in a supervised living group for persons which had a slight mental illness without showing symptoms of aggressiveness. To Salvatore's surprise, suddenly Mrs. Zanalla replied with a remarkable self-secureness, "I am not mentally ill, but I am having emotionally a hard time as I have suffered a big loss in my family." "Ah, a tragic death in the family," shouted Torzalij. Salvatore didn't understand his reaction. Then Torzalij turned towards the judge and said, "Dear Judge, I sense here an emotionally prejudiced witness. It should be straightened out if the witness is suited to do a statement in this case before her statement is accepted during the trial." Then he turned towards Mrs. Zanala and asked her quick like a shot, "What kind of medication do you take?" There is a high possibility that there are among these medications ingredients which affect the visual capacities. Zanala felt taken by surprise and stuttered insecure. Ask my doctor," said she and added, "I have seen what I testified and you can't make me change my statement with your sleight of hand tricks." After 2 hours the second trial had ended and the judge granted a few more days to Torzalij and his client Kantaris to prepare their defense. Salvatore was convinced that they surely would make good use of the additional time, but all in all he had come again to the point where he was once again disappointed by the judicial hearing, as the gleam of hope which shined for a moment had quickly went off. Kantaris surely would challenge the enforcement of a court ruling in his favor with all possible legal means and prologue the execution. Suddenly an idea popped up in his head. Hasty he left the courthouse, and when he arrived at the main entrance of the building he turned to the left and waited behind the corner. It didn't take much time until Kantaris showed up with her lawyer, and to his surprise they turned also to the left and came walking in his direction. "Shit!" Quickly Salvatore went over to a van which was parked at the corner and hid behind it at the side that was faced towards the road so that they couldn't see him. Step by step they approached him, so he bent down some more and braced himself on his hands so that he was able to see their feet under the van. He was shocked when he realized that they came walking directly towards the van. Torzalij got onto the vehicle on the driver's side, while Kantaris went to the front seat passenger side with her high heels. Salvatore barely managed to hide under the van. As also Kantaris had closed the door with a jolt, the engine went on. Luckily the space between the van and the pavement was bigger than the one of usual passenger cars. He managed to put his body into the right position so that he wasn't rolled over by Torzalij, which first drove the van slightly backwards, then while standing turned the wheels to the right and drove away. Instantly he stood up and hid behind another car. At the same time he caught the van's identification plate number. Chapter 12, From Saulus to the Death Cap. As long as the mind does not change, any external change is void. Walt Whitman. Giovanni Gabriele awakened from his coma. Something was wrong. He didn't feel well. He felt an unpleasant pain around his stomach and cardiac region. Then he noticed that he was lying in the hospital. And little by little he started to remember everything: the kidnapping, the hours of isolation, the hunger, the thirst, especially the thirst, and that strange guy. That damn guy which had done all these cruelties to him. Hate didn't come up in his heart while thinking of the strange guy which had made him go through all these pains. Why not? His words seemed to be the reason. His words. Gabrielle thought a while intensively about them. Suddenly a man in his mid-40s with blonde, thin hair, which he had dressed in a way to cover his advancing baldness, burst into his room. He was accompanied by a younger guy which seemed to be his assistant. He disliked both of them immediately as they had disturbed his trains of thought. "Finally, Mr. Gabriel, you are awake. We have to question you regarding the kidnapping. The fugitive criminal will soon be caught, and hopefully the decisive hint comes from you." Slowly. Gabriel detested it when people went like a bull at his gate. "First of all, who are you?" Lagina reacted instantly with a submissive behavior. "Excuse me if I went down your door like a bull. I am Commissioner Lagoina and I am leading the ongoing investigations in your case, dear Mr. Gabriel." "And he?" "Oh, he is my assistant, fresh from the police academy and still wet behind his ears." Then he chuckled and added, "If you understand what I mean. Well then, as you like. Ask your questions, I will see if I can answer them," said Gabriel, notably disinterested. Lagina noticed that and didn't like Gabriel's tone. He missed Gabriel's interest in solve his own kidnapping case. He had the impression that Gabriel was strongly indifferent and showing an improper amount of mistrust. That worried him. "Well, then let's start," said Lagina jovial. He attempted to loosen the situation a little bit to animate Mr. Gabriel to start to talk. Therefore, he was really surprised when Gabriel touched his temples with his forefingers, closed his eyes, and said after a few seconds, "I have to concentrate, please be quiet for a moment." "But..." Lagina was clearly irritated and looked to Sergio, his assistant, hoping for moral support. But this one only hiked his shoulders. Approximately 2 minutes elapsed, then Gabriel opened again his eyes. During that interval he had recapitulated the past and knew now what to say. Lagina noticed immediately that Gabriel now was ready to talk. He rubbed his hands and started his interrogation. The interrogation resulted in the following. When it came to report about what Gabriel had done and felt before, during and after the kidnapping, he was very detailed, but he had remarkable memory gaps when it came to talking about the kidnapper's look, behavior and words. At the end of the interrogation, Lagina was obviously disappointed. He had the hunch that Gabriel probably was affected by the Stockholm Syndrome. If that was the case, then Gabriel had developed an approving mindset towards the actions of his kidnapper. Basically the worst case that an investigator could imagine, as the victim became very constrained in his willingness to cooperate with the police and even was trying to protect the kidnapper from the police. But only one person knew that that was not the case: Gabriel himself. He had retained consciously information regarding the kidnapper, as the psychological and physical experiences he had went through would be the beacon for a new era in his life, an era with a radically new vision and way of life. Lagina, on the other hand, was devastated as he saw his dream of a stellar career recede far away. It seemed that all the odds were stacked against him. Everywhere road he went ended with a dead end. Also, that guy, Salvatore Noranti, had turned out to be a flop, even if everything had started out so promising that evening when he was chasing the alleged kidnapper with his cross cycle around the city and even had managed to bring him to fall. And when they had cornered him at his home and finally captured him, just then it turned out that the alleged kidnapper was a drug addict and petty criminal which had sold his cross bike 1 month ago to a stranger. Of course, he was not able to give the police any useful indications regarding that stranger, as his brain was fogged by his constant drug consumption. Salvatore knew how to make use of the advantages of the internet. He had been able to provide himself Torzalij's home address by taking as starting point the vehicle number he had memorized when they were at the courthouse. Something that in ancient times was laborious and most often a good friend at the police was needed for, was today for everyone easily accessible over the internet. The road traffic department offered the possibility to retrieve the owner of a vehicle's name and address just by using the vehicle number. And there he was at the gates to Torzalij's mansion. He had come on Victor's cycle, which he earlier had well hidden in a faraway bush. It was already midnight. A 2-meter-high hedge surrounded the property, which was lying in absolute silence. The estate was situated remote from the next village, solitary on a hill, surrounded by nothing else than savaged fields and forest. It had taken Salvatore about 90 minutes to get here. Actually, Torzalij was not his true target, Kantaris was it, even if he had become her aide by helping her out to trample justice under their foods. Indeed, Salvatore was hoping to encounter with a little bit of luck at Torzalij's place also Kantaris' vehicle to get her vehicle number and with that her home address. What he then would do to her was already clear to him. The plan he had been working on and for which he had procured additional information at the library would be executed step by step. He had had the idea during his extended walks through the forests, as only that provided a temporary relief to his soul, when one day he encountered at the bottom of oak trees standing in a glade a few death-cap mushrooms. From his adolescence as a circus child, he remembered the lessons regarding all creatures of nature his father had taught him on their extended walks they did through the woods. He had immediately recognized the extremely poisonous mushrooms and taken a few of them with him. That day he was so desperate that he was about to commit suicide because of the loss of his daughter. Since then he considered the option repeatedly until he dropped it one day. And now the time to lead the deadly mushrooms to their true destiny, namely to retaliate the death of his little angel. Salvatore imagined how he would take Kantaris by surprise in her home, how she would be frightened at the first moment but instantly would show of her venomous character trait as soon as she would have recovered from the first shock. But that wouldn't help her out this time. He would tie her up, stuff a gag in her throat, blindfold her and drag her out to the woods. There he knew a few places which probably hadn't seen a soul but his own in years. Tied up and blindfolded, he then would drench her in the Last Supper. A supper that wouldn't suit her at all. After 8 hours she would start to vomit, and from there on it would get worse and worse. But after a while the symptoms would decline for 2 or 3 days so that she eventually would feel better again. But surely she would lose her pomposity, as she would only receive water from him while he could feast his hunger for revenge by seeing her lamenting. And then after 5 days the true power of the mushrooms would reveal itself and transfer the witch to hell by a complete failure of her liver. He shivered with the thought at it. Maybe he had to arrange things more discreet and keep her at her home during the time period until the mushrooms unfolded their deadly effect, so that the police would assume that she had poisoned herself, but there was an ongoing risk of having unwanted guests. He liked the first version of his imaginary retaliation the most. Salvatore had walked one time around the property and hadn't seen, to his dislike, any other entrance than the main gate. The mansion made the impression of a fortress, a castle of evil, as if it was hiding something terrible. It tempted him to find out what terrible secrets this mansion was hiding. Therefore, he sneaked again around the mansion and was hoping to find a slip-through in the hedge. And indeed, after an intensive search, he managed to find a spot in the hedge where the thicket was less dense. He slowly crawled through. When he was already through with his upper body, he could feel a wire mesh fence which had been positioned shortly after the hedge. He gave it shortly a thought and decided to continue while he erected himself along the fence. The fence surely had been placed there to hinder smaller animals to crawl into the garden. It was a night of a full moon, so not very ideal to remain unseen, but he got a clearer view of the property and he was astonished when he saw the well-kept gardens around the villa. It was frightening what such a shyster earned with his fight against proper justice. He started to climb over the fence. Thanks to his agility, he managed it effortless. Then he approached slowly the villa. Next to the villa there was a further building, possibly a guest house or a bigger garden shed with a big garage. Only one light was burning in the villa. As he approached cautious the window, he was able to recognize that it was the living room where the light came from. He spied into the living room. In the middle he was able to recognize a fireplace. In front of it was lying a tiger skin rug. Beside of it there were black leather sofas. He saw a few old-fashioned armoires, a bar, bookshelves, and in the back a big elegant desk. And there he was, Mr. Torzelage, leaning backwards in his big leather armchair, in front of him his laptop. He seemed lightly clothed. Because of the slight blurring window glass and the white curtain, he wasn't able to see exactly the proceedings in the living room. After a while Torzelage jerked and Salvatore saw how Mrs. Kantaris crawled out below the desk. Now he suddenly understood what was going on and a shudder of disgust overcame him. But what could he do now? He had found out that they had an affair which was not against the law and didn't help his cause. He had to look around and find Kantaris' car. That was his absolute priority. He wanted to find out her domicile and therefore her vehicle license plate number was his best shot. Sgen. Therefore he went away from the window and searched the property. Ahead he saw the transporter with which he had already made acquaintance and which belonged to Torzelage. Otherwise there was no other vehicle visible on this side of the property. So he decided to sneak around the villa. Maybe her vehicle was parked at the backside and after that he would check out the adjoining building. He advanced slowly and further ahead he remarked a sparse light which shined through a small basement window of the villa and which was situated just slightly above the soil. The small window was covered from the outside and he remarked that also the other basement windows were covered. He found that peculiar. On that specific basement window a piece of the coverage was broken, probably by the weather, and he was able to see a weak light shimmering through. He kneeled down, looked through the small gap and saw that there was a wire frame worked into the window glass which gave it an additional stability and prevented it from bursting when it got hit. Next he saw a poorly illuminated basement vault. But suddenly he was startled. He wasn't sure, but it seemed to him as if he was seeing a human shadow which was kneeling huddled on the floor. He waited for a moment but the shadow didn't move. He was waiting for a movement to go sure that it was a person. The thought that they were keeping captured somebody down here in the basement came to his mind. Suddenly some movement came into the scenery. The basement cleared up and Kantaris entered the vault followed by Torzelage. What was going on here? Who did they held captured? Was it just a further perverted game of theirs? Were they keeping a sex slave on which they acted out their sadistic tendencies, possibly against her will? Maybe it was an innocent immigrant which got caught in their clutches? Anxiously he continued to watch what would happen next. Torzelage bent down to the person, which Salvatore now identified as a female, and started to putter around her. He put a kind of joist on her back. Kantaris was positioned further apart so that he couldn't see her. Then he saw how a chain came down from the ceiling. Torzelage attached the chain to the balk and then he went also away out of Salvatore's visual field. It took only a moment, then the chain got tightened and the joist on which the woman was attached started to raise towards the ceiling. Now it seemed as life suddenly had returned to her body. She started to scream and wind herself, but he barely was able to hear her screams. It seemed that the windows were soundproof. It was a real torture chamber that the two of them had installed in the basement. Salvatore's blood started to boil. He had to help her, but how? Besides of his Swiss Army pocket knife that his grandfather had gifted him and that he always carried with him, he didn't have any weapons. He wasn't sure if he would be able to contain both of them with it. His view felt on the adjacent building. Maybe he was able to find there a more powerful weapon. He quickly sneaked over to the other building, which was lying in the dark as it was flanked by trees. After a short inspection, he came to the conclusion that all possible access points were sealed well and that even in front of the windows there were everywhere bars mounted. So he returned to the villa and started to look for an open window to get into the villa and finally into the basement and help the poor woman as good as he could. And indeed, he found an open window. It was the one that probably led to the bathroom, as it was smaller and situated higher than the rest of the windows. With some effort, he managed to pull himself up and to squeeze through it. Salvatore came into a bathroom which was luxuriously equipped. Even if he had no flashlight, the weak light of his Casio Illuminator digital watch was enough to see the whirlpool, the marble floor, and the beautiful ornaments which were at the ceiling. The taps even seemed gold-plated. He sneaked out of the bathroom and came into a lighted long corridor where different paintings were hanging on the walls. Mainly portraits, landscapes, and some still lives. All of them rather very boring and classic. Where was the entry to the basement? Frenetically he went along the corridor. Somehow he had to be able to hear some screams, so he stopped and got quiet and listened into the silence. It took a while until he could capture very weakly a whimpering. It came from his right. Slowly, very slowly, and without making any noise, he approached the source of the whimpering. He already had turned around the corner at the end of the long corridor when he saw ahead a door which wasn't closed completely and from which a gleam of light came through. The whole scenery was spooky. Carefully he opened the door and was able to better hear the whimpering. There were sounds of supplication and crying at the same time, uttered by a woman. He wasn't able to understand the words correctly. Then he heard a dirty laughter from Torzalage, followed by a hysterical screech of Kantaris. Salvatore was now very close to the scenery. He had sneaked up to them and was hiding behind a column, and what he saw in front of him was terrifying. On the floor was a woman crawling on all fours while a huge mastiff was trying to penetrate her from behind with his erected penis. Torzalage was surrounding them with his camera, filming them from behind, while Kantaris was standing in front of the woman wearing a black leather dress and mask and whipping the victim's arms and breasts. It was hideous. Salvatore couldn't look any longer at it. He saw his chance to interfere coming when Torzalage approached step by step the column where he was hiding behind and meanwhile focused on the woman and the dog with his camera. Suddenly Salvatore sprang forward, snapped Torzalage's arm and bent it backwards, then he grabbed his throat with his arm while holding at the same time the Swiss Army knife in his hand. Kantaris started to scream while Torzalage stiffened himself and remained at the same spot. "It's him, that son of a bitch!" "Arg!" shouted she, full of anger, and hit with her whip the woman and the dog the same time. The dog uttered a shrill yelp while the woman cried in agony. Then the dog fled up the stairs from where Salvatore had come to the basement. "You don't have any chance to get out of here unscathed," said Torzalage with a remarkably calm voice. Salvatore was about to cut open his throat because of that provocation. "Shut up, you damn bastard! Ha 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 ha! You are about to lose your dirty laugher, you jerk," fizzled Salvatore in his ear and pulled him to the woman kneeling on the floor. The blood was running down her naked body and she was sobbing bitterly. Salvatore bent down to her while still holding Torzalage under his control. "Hey you, don't give up. I will help you." She lifted her head and suddenly Salvatore recognized her. It was Francesca Zanella, the woman, which had confirmed his version of the happenings in the park with Kantaris and who had been subsequently attacked verbally by Torzalage, which tried to dishonor her credibility in the court, because she temporarily lived in a living group for people with psychological problems. "You jerks," shouted Salvatore. "So it is true what she saw and testimonied?" "Of course it is true, you asshole, but I give a shit about you and your stupid daughter," shouted Kantaris the witch. Salvatore suddenly saw red. He cut through Torzalage's throat and kicked him towards the floor. Torzalage grabbed his throat and only uttered gargling noises while he opened wide his eyes. "Arg!" shouted Kantaris. She got mad with anger and started to whip Salvatore, which dodged her attacks and approached her at the same time. So she backed off quickly and then suddenly stood still. Surprisingly, she uttered a dirty laughter, pushed a button on the wall, and out of the wall came out a metal grid which sealed of the torture vault. Salvatore started to hit against the metal grid. Again and again. He was beside himself with rage. "Yes, vent your rage on it. Hit it stronger, come on. Get horny on it, you bastard. But it won't do you any good. You will be next," she scolded and got out a handy. Then you pushed a short dial button and said the words, "Come over here, it is your turn." Torzalage was still grabbing his throat wound with his hand and crawled to the grid. With the other hand he grabbed the grid and burbled, "Open it. Get me out of here, She gave it a short thought and reached out for the button to activate the grid, but she stopped. "Come on," gasped Torzalage. Kantaris shook her head and said, "Darling, I can't risk it." "I am sorry." "Wait a moment." "You bitch, I will." Kantaris got an annoyed facial expression but didn't say anything more. The hour of the demon. The fatal thing about our faith is that we see a demon in Satan and not a part of our personality. Werner Mitch. Salvatore kneeled down to Francesca to liberate her from the joist and to help her get up. When he had finished and was just about helping her with getting up to give her his jacket, he was able to hear someone descending down to the basement vault. It took a half eternity until the silhouette of a man appeared at the bottom of the stairs. What he saw was the picture of a haggard old man about 60 years old with thinning white hair in a pullover full of holes and scuffed pants, wearing around his hips a tools belt made of leather. Animo Pescatori and Torzalage had met as client and lawyer for the first time. Back then Pescatori was accused of child abduction, including murder and barbaric torture. Torzalage managed to get for him a relatively good deal at court. Good for Pescatori, bad for the society. Last but not least, also because of the forged psychological assessments which Torzalage had obtained afterwards from a psychiatrist he had bribed and that certified his Pescatori's harmlessness and also his unsuspicious behavior during his stage in jail. Helped to get the demon out of jail after only 7 years. That Torzalage had gotten a much bigger monster into his house than he ever could imagine he ignored, and it wouldn't have mattered to him even if he knew, as the monster was like-minded to him. Pescatori had been active since the 60s as a serial offender. His victims were primary children. He had commenced his career at a time where there were no computers and no DNA analysis. At a time where many crimes remained unsolved, so all of his crimes had remained unsolved except for one. And it was only due to the coincidence that he finally got caught. One day a man got lost in the area where Pescatori lived because he had had a breakdown with his car. When he got to Pescatori's secluded farm, he saw from a distance how Pescatori was about to drag one of his victims to the stable to feed its remains to the pigs. The man ran away and notified later the police. When the police arrived at the farm, they found a few human remains. They only found those remains. His secret earth bunker in the nearby forest, where he had installed a torture chamber, remained undiscovered. Also, the identification of the victim later was unsuccessful, which worked for him. It came to the arrest and the herewith related obligatory media hype, why Torzalage finally took notice of Pescatori. The joy in the pain of others was in Pescatori's blood. He had discovered that joy early in his childhood. It was like an inner thrill which overcame him at the sight of other people's pain. In fact, that were the only happy moments in his life. As for the rest of it, the access to human emotions remained denied to him, which didn't bother him at all. And because a human being strives for happiness, he started to search for victims which would give him this happiness he was longing for, with their faces and cries of agony and pain. First, he directed his attention towards the animals on the farm on which he grew up. He drowned kitten and birds which he caged up in different bags and pushed them underwater while he watched how the water entered the bags and the animals found their death under screams in their desperate fight for life. For cats he used more tough burlap bags as they were more difficult to kill, but as everyone knows, you grow with the challenge, while for birds he enjoyed to use transparent plastic bags. Snails he pierced with glowing needles. Ants he trampled to death or doused their constructions with gasoline and burned them down. The donkey he hit with a whip, the dog and the pigs with a cane, and there was truly no animal in the whole farm which did not try to flee when seeing him, as long as it could. And when it came to the point that a chicken's neck had to be ringed around for preparing the dinner, or to break a rabbit's neck and skin it, he was always at the spot. His father was a hard-working man, which was also capable of hitting hard, but he didn't notice his son's activities. On the contrary, he appreciated his son's steadfast constitution. Then even if he was skinny, he never complained about the hard work and withstand a lot. The mother on the other side noticed very early that her son's behavior was out of the normal, but she never dared to confront him as she was afraid of him. Friends he didn't have any, and his mother wasn't granted any further children as she got an uterus infection after giving birth to him, and so he didn't have also any siblings. His unregularly visits of the remote school were the only moments where he had contact with other people and children. And so as chance would have it, it came one day to the point that he burst upon some vagrant kids on his way home from school. They were 3 of them, all more or less in his age. when they surrounded him to bully him around and take the few things he had from him, but they realized too late that they were messing with the wrong guy. Pescatore managed to rout out 2 of them, then he grabbed the 3rd one and he became his first human victim. After finishing the kid off, he felt like reborn. From that moment on, he never again wanted to content himself with just killing and torturing animals. That event influenced him a lot. Kids became from that moment on his primary target. He liked that they expressed their pain so genuinely when they were suffering. He found his victims frequently among the waifs and strays and the street children, mainly the poor of the poorest, but not only. Every child was a potential victim to him. And so he managed during the years to come at a rate of 50 victims and was sometimes surprised how strong some people could fight back if their life was in danger, even if they didn't look strong at first sight. He started to like his victims struggling. So he started with the time to refine his ritual by giving his victims the impression to have a chance in fleeing or even win the upper hand through a fight. But the cards finally were always distributed to Pescatore's advantage, as himself he had always a killing weapon while the victim was empty-handed, and there was only one way out, and that path went through him. Usually he started his ritual with an observation, as he didn't act any more so impulsive and unsystematic like in the beginning. Then he stunned his victim and brought it to a secure place where he could torture the victim to death. Therefore he had troublesomely dug in the deep woods at a god-forsaken place, an earth hole, which over the years he had expanded to a truly torture basement. From time to time, when he didn't find a suitable human victim, he took again potluck with an animal. He even went that far that he fought with dogs, and if he wanted to carry it to the extreme, he jumped at a pig and stabbed it to death. When he got 30 years old, first his father died and then shortly after also his mother because of grief, and so he inherited the farm. It was a small farm that barely produced enough harvest to secure the self-subsistence of a family. The sparse surplus he managed to sell on the markets of the surrounding villages and was able to buy himself from the earnings the goods he couldn't produce by himself. Pescatore was poor and remained poor, but that didn't bother him. On the contrary, on his farm he had the quietude he needed for his gruesome activities. He didn't make any movies or other kind of recordings from his atrocities. Also didn't he conserve any personal belongings of his victims, something that distinguished him radically from the usual serial killer and gave him at the same time an advantage, as it was much more difficult to link him to his victims than after he had disposed of his victims, and in doing so he became a specialist. Nothing else linked him to them except his memories, in which he could revel for hours. His mind served him as an archive. Again and again he masturbated while thinking of his victims and pain. When he started with his tenure at Torzalage, after this one had pulled him out of jail, he realized quickly why Torzalage had shown such a high interest in him, and it seemed as if destiny had brought together the right two. As Torzalage had from time to time involuntary guests at his basement. Mostly shabby hookers or young runaway girls, which he picked up off the streets and then lured into his basement to submit them to his special sadistic practices while he filmed the whole thing. The real dirty finish he left to Pescatore, which could deal with them as he wished and had to get rid of the bodies. Pescatore admitted that he didn't have so much fun as before when he acted on his own. He disliked his dependency from Torzalage, but the situation was howsoever better than the alternative of having to spend further years in jail and at the end, when released, having to spend the rest of his days on the street. He truly had found a nice home, even got some remuneration for his work as gardener and janitor, and last but not least could follow his favorite hobby. So when he looked at it that way, everything was fine. With Torzalage, Animo Pescatore had found a host which himself was not an angel. Torzalage's first wife had left and divorced him because of his perverted sexual demands, which she didn't want to satisfy. The amount of compensation he had to pay her back then did hurt him still today. Thereafter he made the acquaintance of a Belarusian through a specialized dating agency. He had had the alternative of an Asian or Brazilian woman, but as he was a complete racist, the Belarusian woman was the optimal choice for him. The Russian woman did bear it a long time with him, hoping the day would come where she could apply for the citizenship in this country. Then she planned to leave him and start a new life on her own. First she was herself the victim of his bizarre affinities, but with the time she was able to convince him that she could help him to get him other women on the street for his purposes. She managed to protect herself while other women became the victims of his perverted torments. But one day she was gone. Nowhere to be found. She had given up her plan and returned back to her country of origin, and at least had finally succeeded to liberate herself of Torzalage's tyranny. Torzalage had to report her as missing person. The police searched her and found her. But when she told the authorities that she didn't want to return to him, it was easy for him to get divorced from her. She got nothing from his fortune as he had made her sign a prenup to evade making the same error twice. It was Torzalij's lucky day when he met Kantaris. She was simply the perfect helper for him, as she had also a perverted and dominant disposition like himself and was moreover wealthy and without scruples. Sjen. But who was Kantaris? Well, Torzalij only knew the tip of the iceberg. They had met each other through the classifieds of a specialized sex magazine. She, 48, is looking for him, W-Fi, without financial interests, for common hours of joy, femdom, S/MP. Mostly those ads were a pure ripoff, and some petty crime crook was behind it, which demanded a small amount by the interested party for the issuance of the telephone number and the address, which then turned out to be false. But in Kantaris' case, Torzalij had the impression that he hit the jackpot, as she was truly at his taste. What he ignored was the circumstance that Kantaris was very well acting with financial interests. During the time they spent together, it was clear for her that he had to pay for everything, and when the day would come that he wasn't any more so agile, as he wasn't the youngest with his 57 years, she would then, when the situation would be opportune, dispatch him, of course not without having changed his testament previously in her benefit to inherit him, as she had done already 3 times before. When Pasactor saw how Torzalij was bleeding to death on the floor, he got angry as he suddenly saw his comfortable living situation threatened. "What's the matter? Can't you handle any more your guests?" "The guy wasn't planned," spitted Kantaris. "He showed up here uninvited." Pescatori became quiet for a brief moment and said then, "Well then, I will make sure that he leaves for sure." "What happened to the boss?" "He got attacked by that guy," nagged she and pointed towards Salvatore. "Not good, really not good." Pescatori grasped with his left hand a hook from his tools belt, one of these hooks that butchers use to move the torsos of the beefs and pigs through the corridors of the slaughterhouse, and with his right hand he grabbed a steel telescope baton, which he expanded with a jolt to its full extension. These kind of baton can cause, even if they are small, a remarkable hitting impact because of their flexibility. If applied properly, you can break somebody's skull or break his bones with just one hit. Salvatore decided instantly to go over to the attack modus. He pocketed his knife and snapped the joist at which Francesca Zanalla had been attached. He swung it and aimed at Pescatori's head. Pescatori, though, carried out a skillful defense reaction. With his butcher hook he managed to deflect the joist while he stroked Salvatore with his baton and missed him by a hair. Salvatore realized instantly that he was dealing with an agile adversary. He started a new attack. This time he carried out a strike towards the adversary, trying to hit his chest. Pescatori again evaded the attack and deflected the joist, while this time he tried to hit Salvatore's arm with a stick. Francesca crawled away into a corner of the basement and started to cry. Suddenly Kantaris saw a possibility to make herself useful. She started to attack Salvatore with her whip. Again and again she whipped him, while Salvatore used the joist to protect himself, but one attack hit him on his hand and caused that the joist fell out of his hands. Step by step he continued to retreat while his adversaries closed in on him. Suddenly he started an attack with his knife. Kantaris scared and backed off, while Pescatori had reckoned with it. With his hook he managed to get hold of Salvatore's sleeve. He tore him down to the floor and struck a blow to his arm with his baton. Salvatore dropped the knife. He had underestimated his adversary, as the hit inflicted him a terrible pain. He came to a wooden table, grabbed one of the chairs, and defended himself against Kantaris' whiplashes. It helped him to detain the worst and to prevent that Pescatori could approach him too much with his hook and baton, but at the same time he realized that he only could act defensive. He had to find a way to carry out also attacks. At one of the walls there was hanging a chain on an attachment hack. He got hold of it and tore it down. Now he started on his part to strike his adversaries while he defended himself with the chair. It became more and more difficult for him to hold the chair with the wounded arm. Pescatori's strike probably had broken him a bone. Although he managed to hit Pescatori with the chain repeatedly on his upper body, this one reacted to his strokes mostly with a grin and yelled, "Come on, you miserable." "Yes, fight back." Kantaris on the contrary yelled when she got hit and retreated some steps back. Salvatore got more and more desperate. Why didn't he manage to inflict some pain in his adversary? It seemed as if he was a demon nourished by the forces of hell. Pescatore had recognized during his career as serial killer that the fighting back of his victims gave him even more pleasure during his ritual of torturing and killing, but he had also learned that he had to count with a massive resistance of his victims, which could become risky for him. Therefore, he had learned with the time passing to harden himself against pain. He even had gotten to the point where he enjoyed his own pain that made him a very strong adversary. And so he yelled at Salvatore again and again, "Come on, you miserable, hit me and hit me. At the time you were shitting in your pants, I was eating nails. Bring it on." Salvatore reached back for a further stroke with the chain. He stroked Pescatore at the upper body, but this time this one snatched at the chain with his hook, and by coincidence he got stuck in a link of the chain. He yanked the chain out of Salvatore's hand. Salvatore tumbled forward, and just in that moment Pescatore gave him a stroke on the head. He lost his consciousness and tilted to the side. When he came back to consciousness, he noticed at his head a stinging pain. He wanted to rub his head to ease the pain, but when he tried to move his arm he noticed that he was tied up. He looked around and realized that he and Francesca were tied up at a huge wheel and that they were in another room of the basement. Pescatore and Kantaris approached them and said, "Did you sleep well, you two lovebirdies?" asked Kantaris provocatively while she was holding a camera in her hands. "Well then let's get started," said Pescatore emotionless and started to turn the wheel. It bothered him that Kantaris was filming him, but as he was depending economically on her, he decided to go along with her game. Francesca started to scream, while Salvatore's head tended more and more downwards and suddenly emerged into a water trough which was attached underneath the wheel and which he hadn't noticed before in the dim light of the basement. He was so surprised that he swallowed up some of the freezing cold water. It burned like hell in his chest. A short moment he managed to suppress the urge to cough, but then he couldn't hold it anymore. Just in that moment the wheel turned again and his head surfaced out of the water. "Sjen." He coughed half of his lung out of his body, his pulse increased rapidly and his breathing frequency too, while Kantaris started to laugh at him and Pescatore fetched a spiky whip and stroked him with a whiplash. The spikes tore painful wounds in his flesh. "Well then, let's give our attention to the young lady who wasn't able to keep her mouth shut," nagged Kantaris full of malicious glee. Pescatore wangled the winder and Francesca's head submerged into the freezing cold water. Her body raged from one side to the other, and when Pescatore turned again the wheel and she surfaced out of the water, she started to cry and screech at the same time as she saw herself at the verge of death, a gruesome death from drowning. And then the whip hit her right in the middle of her face. Blood mixed up with tears. Desperation and fear of dying started to take place in her heart. Let's go on with the wet and cheerful tombola of pain. Hi, laughed Kantaris dirty. The wheel turned again in the other direction and it was yet again Salvatore's turn. This time he was better prepared for it as he had used the time when Francesca was underwater to take deep breaths in a regular rhythm and so be able to hold his breath for a longer time underwater. This will work out better, he thought, when just in that moment he got struck again by a whiplash whilst he had his head underwater. Terrified and in pain he opened his mouth to catch some air and swallowed again some water. He started to cough and then the wheel finally turned further. Finally some air. "Bravo, we have a first winner, dear ladies and gentlemen, let us continue our vicious game," said Kantaris, making ridicule of them. Pescatore had raised the torture. What would be next? He went away and returned with a canister. Then he opened it and started to sprinkle Salvatore and Francesca with the content. Hi. Our candidates surely didn't count with that. Gasoline. It was gasoline and hurt him tremendously in his wounds. Now it was again Francesca's turn. She hadn't prepared herself for it. Her head got submerged underwater and soon she had the impression that her lungs were about to burst. She got into a panic, opened wide up her mouth and the water entered. Just in that moment the wheel turned again and she was barely able to cough it out. Pescatore took the gasoil canister and canted it into the water, then he turned again the wheel. "Let's see how much you enjoy that. Take a good slug of it." Ha. Salvatore's head submerged into the mixture of gasoline and water. He held his breath. Keep it up, said he to himself. The moment lasted an eternity. At the same time he was fearing the next whiplash, which would force him to open up his mouth and then to swallow this deadly mixture. But why didn't the stroke come? Fear started to take over Salvatore's mind. Fear like he had never before felt. He started to pray, "Dear Almighty, help me, please help me as I can't bear it anymore." Then came the dreaded moment. He had to open his mouth and snap some air, and there was nothing but freezing cold water interspersed with gasoline. The mixture burned down his throat like 1,000 little needles. Then the coughing, the gasping for air, but this time there was only the mixture of water and gasoline. This was the end. The end of his odyssey against injustice ended here. He had fallen at an adversary, a demon sent by the devil himself to cause the living the same pain like he spread in hell since eternal times. Then came the whiplash, and with the lash a loud crack. The bolt nut which held the axle burst and flew directly through Pescatore's chest. There was now a gape open on his chest. Cantaris was so frightened about the event that she remained like glued to the spot while she focused the camera on Pescatore, which remained stiff in the same position. Then followed a loud creak, and all of a sudden the big wheel overturned itself with its freight forward. Cantaris barely managed it to fulfill a half-turn when she got pierced by a spiky wooden stake which had broken away from the wheel. The wooden stake penetrated her from the side, starting at the ribs. It went through the heart and the lungs and pinned her down to the floor. Pescatore himself got pierced by one of the wooden stakes directly through his wide-open mouth. The stake bore through his mouth cavity into the head and exited at backside. Sgen, Salvatore, Francesca, Pescatore, and Cantaris. All four of them were lying on the floor of the torture chamber and remained like that for a while. Then, very faintly, Salvatore did a first movement. He was able to move his arm. The strings from his hand had loosened themselves from the broken stake. Physically he felt terrible, but in his soul he felt unexplainably well. An unpleasant smell of sulfur was lying in the air. What had happened? A wonder had occurred. Their tormentors were lying all dead on the floor. Was it the Lord himself which had intervened? The forensic experts would define it later as a combination of material fatigue and incredible luck at the right moment. Soon after he had liberated himself and Francesca, he put her on a sofa in the living room and sat on a chair when he called the police. When the police arrived, they couldn't believe their eyes. Sgenu. The on the floor lying bled to death lawyer Torzalaj und the sheer amount of torturing instruments, human remains and film material they found afterwards in the property, and which suggested evidence of a tremendous brutality, surpassed the psychological tolerance line of usual policemen by far. Therefore, a team of specialists had to be invoked immediately to deal with this bizarre and most unusual case. The result was that discovery that Torzalaj had been acting out his perversions since years and that he had been helped in the past time by Cantaris. The kidnapped young woman mistreated and tortured them and forced them to do atrocities while they filmed their wrongdoings. Additionally, they had teamed up with the already known and very dangerous criminal Animo Pescatore and gave him harbor, while he helped them to commit and conceal the obnoxious crimes. Francesca reported how she had been abducted, and Salvatore alleged the same, even if it was not the whole truth, but he was convinced that he had the right for that white lie, and the peculiar case attracted the attention of the journalists, which came like blowflies. Chapter 13. At the end. At the end, only that counts is what we have done and experienced and not what we wished for. Arthur Schnitzler. When the entrepreneur Giovanni Gabriele saw Salvatore's picture in the newspaper and instantly recognized him, he felt a deep gratitude and finally knew whom he had to be thankful for his change of heart. He started to think about possibilities to serve the society with his fortune even more, and came the idea to hire people which he personally recruited at the employee agencies and emergency centers for homeless people. Later he always was again surprised to realize that also a homeless not was born as such one, and that he also could be a valuable person that often even had a professional education, but through a combination of unfortunate events had come into this situation. He was able to ascertain that mostly they were people which hadn't anymore any relatives left, and additionally had been struck by a blow of fate like unemployment, sickness, a case of death, a divorce or an accident, and therefore had come into a dead-end situation. They were a lot of people who deliberately grabbed the hand that was reached them to find out a way of their homelessness. When Patricia, the girl that had been mistreated during a long period by her unemployed mother, saw Salvatore's picture in the newspaper, she thought back at that unforgettable day when she and her mother had made his acquaintance. After that day they had encountered Salvatore, everything went different. Her mother had learned her lesson. Patricia had forgiven her. And so things not only went better between daughter and mother, but also with their general living situation. The mother gave up her plan to obtain unjustified a pension for invalidity and found a job as cashier at the supermarket. A few time thereafter she also got to know a new partner for life. He was a young lean man which felt in love with her. It took her a while longer until she also felt the same for him, as she wasn't any more used to such feelings and had almost lost the faith in love. The relation between mother and daughter solidified itself over the years, and a bond was created like it normally should exist between parents and children. A bond of trust and the feeling to be able to rely on each other. But one thing they would never do again. They would never again loose a word about that said day and what had happened with Salvatore. Claudia Silenzia, the fallen marketing co-worker, saw Salvatore's picture on a small television on her 3 by 3 meters prison cell. She couldn't stand it. And so she was found the next day hanging on a piece of linen sheet that she had fixed at the high-lying grills of her small cell window. Nobody had seen it come. Nobody came to organize her funeral, therefore the city organized a standard funeral which they paid out of Mrs. Silenzia's remaining estate. The rest of it descended to the city. Lagina was sitting with his assistant Sergio Tazzi at the old lady's home. She still was broken-hearted about the death of her beloved Yorkshire Terrier, but also happy to have been able to leave the hospital. Gina's boss had taken away from him all the important cases after the fiasco with the crossbike driver Salvatore Noranti, which Lagina had accused mistakenly to be the kidnapper of the entrepreneur Gabriele, and also because of the material damages caused at the pursuit of the crossbiker. Finally, he had compelled him to reassume the case of the killed Yorkshire Terrier. In the kidnapping case of Gabriele, the track was lost at Salvatore Noranti. The investigations had revealed that he had sold his crossbike. The buyer had contacted him over a public phone, paid it in cash, and not notified the road traffic department about him being the new proprietor. Lagina commenced again with his interrogation. He showed the old lady an album with pictures of known criminals and let her bury herself into it while Sergio was reading the newspaper. Aurelia, the old lady, was truly determined to find the murderer of her beloved terrier Puffy, but she already was a little bit aged. I am not quite 100, as she used to say, and therefore the whole situation fatigued her tremendously. She needed a rest and therefore grabbed the cup of instant coffee on the table, lifted her head a little and took a sip when her eyes looked at the young assistant reading the newspaper. Their eyes met and she blushed a little. But suddenly she saw something that took her breath away. She saw the murderer of Puffy. With the shock, she choked on the coffee. Lagina slapped her back, but it seemed not to be helpful. She got a true cough attack. Suddenly Aurelia didn't get enough air. She opened wide her eyes and also her mouth and stretched her arms forward like she tried to grab something. Suddenly she collapsed and remained motionless in that posture. Sergio was perplexed. Was it because of him that she had gotten scared so terrible? Suddenly he had an intuition. He turned around the newspaper and saw an article about the bizarre case with the pictures of Salvatore Liberatori and the lawyer Torzilage, and all of a sudden he understood what just had happened. While Lagina, confused, called the ambulance, Sergio was laughing inwardly, not over the old lady, but over the fact that he had just solved his first case. The resolution he would keep to himself. Aurelia, on the other side, died on the spot. Only the Almighty knows if she met Puffy in heaven. What concerned the case of Liberatori versus Cantaris, the judge posthumously decided that she and her husband were guilty in all aspects. Due to a lack of descendants and a testament from Torzilage or Cantaris, the government paid after closing the case, and all formalities and appropriate compensation sum to Francesca and Salvatore, financed by the assets of the both deceased criminals. Admittedly, it was rather an unusual procedure, but given the circumstances of that unusual case, the media circus, and the surge of sympathy from the population for the victims, it was a justified action which served all. Salvatore transferred the money to a bank account which would paid out to his son Michel at the year of his majority. Then one day, after all the buzz about his person had settled, he went deep into the forest, not carrying a lot with him. When he found a suited place, he got out of his rucksack a collapsible shovel and started to dig. When the hollow was large and deep enough, he crafted a mesh of branches and leaves which he leant against the shovel which he had stuck into the hollow. Then he tossed some soil on top of it. Afterwards he laid down into the hollow and tilted the shovel slowly. The cover made out of branches, leaves and earth closed down over him, and he folded his arms over his chest, holding his diary in his hands. The melancholy which had taken possession of him during the last days became stronger and swelled into a Swedish mood in his heart. Calm and completely liberated from worries, he fell asleep and was never seen again. The end.